Welcome to the December 11, 2018 regular meeting of the Troy Planning Commission. Copies of the agenda for tonight's meeting are available at the entrance to the room. Additionally, the agendas and minutes of prior meetings are available on the city's website. The meeting will be conducted in accordance with the agenda as presented or amended by the Planning Commission. The roles and responsibilities of the Planning Commission are outlined on the reverse side of tonight's agenda. State law establishes planning commissions. The commission is comprised of 9 members, all of whom have volunteered to serve. Members are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by city council. The other individuals seated at the table this evening are representatives of the city's planning department, the city attorney's office, and the city's planning consultant, Carlisle, Wortman and Associates. If you wish to address the planning commission, please come forward when recognized and provide your name and address on the sign-on sheet. Please begin your remarks by stating your name for the benefit of the commissioners. All remarks are to be addressed to the Planning Commission, not to anyone else in the room. At this time, I ask that all cell phones or any other devices that might disrupt this meeting please either be placed in silent mode or be turned off. The roll call, Ms. Sarnicki, please.
Mr. Abhidian?
Here.
Ms. Cruz?
Here.
Mr. Faison?
Here.
Ms. Fowler?
Here.
Mr. Hudson?
Here.
Mr. Krent?
Here.
Mr. Zanzika?
Here.
Mr. Tagle?
Here. Quorum present. Item number 2 on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda for tonight, please? Motion by Mr. Faison and second by Mr. Tagle. Roll call, Ms. Sarnicki, please.
Ms. Cruz?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Zanzika?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Abhidian?
Yes. Item number 3, approval of the minutes for the November 27, 2018 meeting. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes, please? Moved by Mr. Zanzika and seconded by Mr. Krent. Roll call, Ms. Sarnicki, please.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Zanzika?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Abhidian?
Yes.
Ms. Cruz?
Yes.
Item number 4, public comment for items not on the agenda. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on an item that is not on the agenda? Please come forward at this time. Seeing none, we move to item number 5 on the agenda, special use approval. Public hearing, special use file number SUJPLN 2018-0018. Proposed 901 Tower Retail with drive-through southeast corner of Crooks Road and Tower Drive, 901 Tower, Section 9, Zoned OM, Office Mixed Use. Mr. Carlisle.
Thank you and good evening. First item tonight in front of you is a special use for proposed retail building at 901 Tower. The Planning Commission members, this came before the Planning Commission fairly recently for a rezoning, and the site entirety was rezoned to OM. The applicant is asking tonight for approval to build a retail building as part on the corner, the corner of Crooks and Tower, to build a small retail building on the corner of that site. The proposed building is approximately 9,800 square feet. It will include 4 tenant spaces, and there is a proposed drive-through as part of the proposal that does require a special use. In front of you is the proposed site plan. The outline in yellow is the proposed building itself. You will note that there is a proposed drive-through again on the back side of the building. In this location, it wraps around to the back of the building and the side of the building. We do note that the building itself does meet all the OM setback and height requirements. The drive-through is at the rear and side of the building, and access to the site will be off the existing access off Tower Drive and a proposed new access off Crooks. This has been reviewed by the engineering department and has been supported for this new access location. With regards to parking, the applicant is utilizing site parking shared with the tower building itself. We do note that by ordinance requirements, there are 543 parking spaces that are required. This includes 429 required for the office building and 114 spaces for the retail building itself. The applicant is providing a total of 516 parking spaces on site. You'll note that's a deficiency of 27 parking spaces. The applicant is proposing to land bank 27 of those parking spaces. We do note that the location of the land bank parking has not been shown on the site plan, and the applicant has been aware of this fact. The Planning Commission has the right to approve land banking, and also has the right to deny the request for land banking. If land banking parking is approved, the applicant shall show the location of the land bank parking on their final site plan that gets approved administratively. With regards to access and circulation, as I noted previously, there are 2 access points to this portion of the site. The first is off the existing site off Tower. The second is a new proposed access point off Crooks. We have reviewed the site with regards to pedestrian access and circulation. We find it has very good pedestrian circulation access. The only point we have a discussion with the Planning Commission is, if you can look at the screen behind you, is we are noting that there's a significant amount of retail parking in the corner of the parking lot site. We're asking if more likely than not people will cross through the drive-through to get to the back of the site to walk around to the front of the building, if there should be an additional pedestrian crossing across or through the drive-through, and should be striped to allow for a safer passage through the drive-through, just knowing that people will walk through the drive-through to get to that front of the site. With regards to landscaping, the applicant is preserving a significant amount of trees on site. They're preserving 23 woodland trees and 3 landmark trees, and they do meet the mitigation requirements as a result of this. And they also do meet all the landscaping requirements. This is a special use. There are 5 standards that we use to review a special use, including compatibility with adjacent uses, compatibility with the master plan, traffic impact, impact on public services, as well as compliance with zoning ordinance standards. We do find that the 5 standards have been met. The project fits within the existing context of office and commercial and mixed-use character of the surrounding area. If the Planning Commission members, we spent a long time in the master plan talking about North Troy and amenities in North Troy to serve the office buildings, and we find this would be a very good addition to the office area of North Troy. In addition, because it already has a high traffic area with significant existing infrastructure, the proposed new building should not add to the existing traffic in that area, as well as the proposed use shouldn't cause any requirement for public services in and above what would be allowed for any other use in that district. With regards to elevations, the applicant has provided elevations for the Planning Commission to review. The top elevation is the elevation that would be seen on Crooks, the front elevation. The right elevation is the elevation that you would be seeing as you drive into the site off of Crooks. The top elevation in front of you is the rear elevation. That's where the stacking of the drive-through is primarily, and the left elevation is the actual drive-through window on the side of the building. The applicant is proposing a longboard material, which is an aluminum siding material intended to look like wood, as well as a masonry material. So conceptually, we support the site plan application as well as the special use. However, we do note that the applicant is deficient of 27 parking spaces. Again, they are proposing 27 land bank parking spaces. If the Planning Commission does support the use of land bank parking for the site, we do recommend approval, provided that the applicant provide the land bank parking on the final site plan, replace the sidewalk on Crooks with an 8-foot sidewalk, add a striped crossing within the drive aisle, and lastly, submit light fixture specifications and details. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carlisle. Any questions for Mr. Carlisle and Mr. Hudson?
Mr. Carlisle, you showed us earlier a slide suggesting that perhaps there'll be a pedestrian marking in the, I guess, the east side. Yes.
Yep.
Those red dots.
Yep.
Is there an entrance to the building at that point, or do they have to go around to the...
There's not an entrance. Mr. Hudson, our thought on that was there's a significant amount of the retail parking located northeast of the building. Knowing how people operate, it's likely that they're going to get to the front of the building via going through the drive-through, crossing the drive-through. There is a sidewalk on the back end of this building that will allow for safe passage around the building to the front of the building to get to the entrance. Otherwise, if there's no safe crossing here, they literally would have to walk around the drive-through or walk through the drive-through without a safe passage. So this is just an opportunity to put in a crossing to allow for designated pedestrian crossing area.
Okay, you answered my second question without me asking it regarding the sidewalk, so
okay.
Thank you.
Ms. Cruz.
Is this Tower Drive address project the same parking lot as the 2 hotels that we saw?
No, I will go the...
Because I couldn't remember
Ms. Cruz, if you look at the screen up here, this is where the two proposed hotels are being proposed.
Okay, okay. And then, as our planning consultant, why did you draw the conclusion that having a drive-through would be appropriate in this area for special use?
In discussions as part of the rezoning, that issue was talked about as part of the rezoning with the future designation that there would be a drive-through. And so that was already somewhat discussed with the Planning Commission. In addition, we find that the applicant has done a nice job in terms of screening the drive-through and putting it in the appropriate location and has met all the other requirements of the zoning ordinance.
Thank you.
Mr. Grant.
Quick question. You may or may not have an answer for this, but is there enough room on that property that is applicable for parking pavement? In other words, it's not wetlands or something else. Is there enough room? So if we approve it, I realize they have to show, before they can build, they have to show where those land-banked parking spots will be. But I'm just wondering, is that land usable for parking?
There is usable land for parking. There are other consequences for putting land bank parking. For example, if they take out trees, they'd have to mitigate the required trees. They'd have to increase their stormwater retention requirements as a result of land bank parking. So yes, there is space to put land bank parking. The applicant would have to determine where it is, and based on where it is, would change some of the requirements as a part of it.
Okay. And then one follow-up question on that marked walkway from the back parking lot around the building. Do we specify a permanent type of pavement marking as opposed to just paint or some applied plastic? Is there going to be something in the concrete, something, three-dimensional or a little bit of relief or something to do it? Because, what happens with paint, it's gone in, 4 or 5 years.
We don't specify that in terms of the zoning ordinance. Doesn't talk about that. The Planning Commission can make that a requirement of approval, and what we've seen in other cases where there's actually a slight raise in the pavement, so it designates that area as pedestrian. There can be use of different type of material, such as a paving material or stamped concrete to designate that area. We are simply suggesting a striping, but if the Planning Commission wants something more than that, certainly that's something that you can put as a condition of approval.
Very nice, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Carlisle? Mr. Sanzika?
Yeah, I know in some circumstances we are able to waive the additional parking, and I wondered why, if it would be applicable in this situation or not, rather than land banking, though.
That was not brought as a request for us. The request was for land bank parking. The applicant did submit a parking study which noted that there were 500, I forgot what the number, 534 parking spaces required. They note that they didn't seek relief in terms of reducing the number. They sought relief via doing it by land banking. The traffic or parking study was reviewed by OHM, our city's consultant, and felt that land banking would be an appropriate remedy to address the deficiency in parking. The applicant didn't ask for relief from the number of 27 spaces, so we didn't review that as a request for relief.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Carlisle at this time? Seeing no other questions, we will ask the applicant to please come forward, present the project.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Planning Commission members. My name is Larry Goss, representing tonight Core BKG Manager, LLC. Happy to answer any questions you may have. The comments that we received, we are in agreement with for the most part. A couple of things on that. One of the reasons we chose the land banking idea was to just keep more of the site green for the time being. The building is, in fact, the greater Troy office market right now is less than fully occupied, and so adding more pavement just didn't seem like a very smart idea. We'd rather have it greener, so that was our approach. We may very well need those spaces. We hope we do at one point in time, but at this point, we don't see that as an immediate need. In terms of the pedestrian crossing, we do note that there is pedestrian crossings just to the south of the building. There's 2 pedestrian marked crossings there. We, again, would be willing to do the recommendation but it's, from our standpoint, we've added some connecting sidewalks and identification marks there, so not really sure that's necessary, but we would be willing to do that if the Planning Commission sees fit on that. Aside from that, I have our architect and civil engineer here to answer any other questions that you might have.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant at this time? Mr. Grant.
Would you be willing to have a raised crosswalk, all of the crosswalks from the parking lot, a raised piece? And the reason I say that is because traffic coming off of a major road like Crooks, they're used to 45 miles an hour, and they come into a parking lot sometimes a little too fast. And those raised crosswalks, and I have photographs of those type examples of those if you'd like, but they do slow down traffic and make them aware that this is more than just a bump in the road. It's something where people are going to be, and I think it's a critical on a just off of a major road.
Are you, I'm trying to envision as more or less like a speed bump kind of thing? Like a wide speed bump?
It's a gradual rise. It's not a bump. It's a gradual rise from both sides. So it's a rise from one side, obviously going down on the other side. And then the center area has a different color concrete so that it's visibly different. Mm-hmm. I've got a couple great examples of that from other cities.
The only thing that comes to mind on that would be how it might affect drainage. I'm not sure whether it's all, as you know, the engineering of the storm drainage is a critical feature on this. Conceptually, I don't have a problem with what you've suggested. If it make it a little bit safer, we're all for that. But we do have the parking lot draining in certain directions, and that may impact that. So I guess I have a little asterisk on that.
Okay. It still can be done with a groove. I could send examples where actually they did have some kind of a groove in there for water.
Yeah, obviously we don't want to create tripping hazards, which become a problem as well. So I guess subject to all of those considerations, we take a look at that.
I'll send the photograph on to the planning department for your reference.
Ms. Cruz.
Have you identified as a tenant who would need to have a drive-through as part of their lease?
Well, we haven't been able to, actually make any kind of commitments because we haven't received site plan approval, but many of the potential tenants that we're talking to find the drive-through very attractive. It's an important consideration. Some won't even consider a site without a drive-through.
Can you give me examples of tenants that you would want to approach that would require a drive-through?
Well, one of them was Panera Bread. That was who we were originally targeting. As you know, they went up the street. So it's that type of tenant that we were talking to. I couldn't give you any specific names other than that right now.
Like Wendy's, McDonald's, Kentucky Fried Chicken?
I'm not...
They all have drive-throughs. Taco Bell has a drive-through.
That's not who we're targeting, but, the market for the convenience of commuters and the convenience of people grabbing their lunch, not all of them have time to sit down. They like to grab and go. It's just sort of where the market is these days. I think it's reasonable to expect that some tenants would want that. But I don't have any tenants in hand. If I did, I'd be happy to share that with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Mr. Tagle.
Yes, I'd like to better understand how these suites are going to be used. When I first looked at these drawings, although this building should be a four-sided building, not a front and back, the architecture didn't necessarily support that 100%. And now that we're talking about the back doors maybe being, and I don't know, I guess that's the question, are they going to be access points for
No,
people? So anybody in the east parking lot is going to somehow have to get across that, either the drive-through lane or come south, cross over at the walk, and then walk around to the front of the building.
Correct, yes. We've identified a pedestrian walkway. We worked with the planning consultants on that to make sure that it was clearly identified that they have a safe walkway to get to the front of the building.
Yeah, I would not support any type of pedestrian movement through that drive lane. It's screened with landscaping as well. I don't know how high those shrubs are. I guess I could have looked on the schedule, but to me, that's an accident waiting to happen.
Our original plan did not have any pedestrian crossings through the drive-through.
Right.
That's your planning consultant's recommendation, but
I also noticed, if I'm parking in the northern part of that eastern parking lot bank, how do I get over to that sidewalk? Am I walking between cars? Am I walking out in the drive aisle? How am I, because I don't see any walkways through your landscape islands. So I guess, how am I getting from north to south to get to your walkway?
from north to south, well, like in most parking lots in suburban office parking lots, you walk in the drive aisles. You walk through the parking lot.
Yeah, to me, that's not an ideal situation.
Well, I mean, when you park your car there and you're walking to the building, that's how you get to the building.
Yeah.
So that's sort of how pedestrians get from one place to another. When they park in a parking lot, they walk through the drive areas.
When I first looked at this project, looking at the building itself, I thought it was quite attractive and well done. And, you know, just looking tonight and hearing some of the comments, I think the planning, in my mind, leaves a little bit to be desired when you have such few parking spaces in the middle, in front of the building, where you're really asking customers to come, and then putting it all in the back side of the building.
Well, actually,
it's unfortunate.
your planning consultants asked us to move all of the building to the street and have no spaces in the front.
Yeah, well,
but that's not really what the market is looking for. They want some identification that there's a convenient place to park when they approach the building. So we worked with them on this as sort of a compromise position, I guess.
Yeah, Mr. Carlin.
I want to set the record clear. I did not ask for the building to be moved closer to Crooks, and in fact, the applicant can move the building back farther from Crooks to add more parking if they would like to do so. There's not a build-to line in this district, so it was not our requirement to move the building closer to Crooks.
Okay, I thought there was a conversation about that. My apologies if I misunderstood your comments, but at some point in time, someone asked us if it would make sense to bring the building all the way up to Crooks Road. In any event, this is our current plan.
And then, I guess for this moment, my last comment is that your north elevation and your east elevation, as far as materials, are lacking. I really think you need to consider bringing some of that longboard product around on those elevations a little bit more than it is, because you're going to see that building from all four sides. You've got street traffic on 3 of the 4 sides, and then a drive lane on the 4th side. So the backside, to me, pretty much looks like a backside. You've got gas meters on there. You've got utility boxes on the wall. So I think you need to do a little bit more with the longboard to help soften those two, the elevation on the rear and on the north side.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant at this time? Mr. Sanzika.
I got a question for the engineer. You have to pay your dues when you're at the meeting also.
Could be the last one.
It could be the last time. But, Mr. Butler, I noticed that you're proposing the storm tech system for the underground. And maybe you could describe how that works, because it looks like there's a lot of infiltration allowed. And I wondered if you looked at the soils to see how this would be accommodated.
This is a little bit different than normal underground detention systems we proposed. This is not a solid pipe. This is a half-chambered plastic chamber that's bedded in stone, in a round stone. It does provide the opportunity for groundwater infiltration. The soils are somewhat conducive to that. So it's a little bit different than what we've previously proposed in other projects.
Did you use the volume, the void ratio of the stone?
We did.
As part of the volume of the
We did,
detention?
yes. Yep.
Well, it's very,
The city does allow for that. Your employer doesn't.
My employer does. Former employer.
Former employer, I apologize, Mr. Sensi.
No problem. Well, I'm very impressed. That's a nice design.
Thank you.
And I'm glad that you were able to provide that at this site.
Another way for us to keep the site greener rather than having a giant detention pond. I thought that was a better answer.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is a public hearing tonight. We actually have 3 public hearings on the agenda this evening, so I just wanted to make a couple of comments on that. A public hearing is an opportunity for residents to share their comments on a specific projects with the Planning Commission. Everyone in attendance who wishes to speak will be provided with an opportunity to speak. We appreciate everyone who came out tonight to share their thoughts with the Planning Commission. Your comments are important. Before I open up the public hearing, it's important to set up some ground rules so that it can be an effective and efficient public hearing. Please remember to sign in and begin your statements, your comments by stating your name and address for the public record. Please address all comments to the chair. Please be respectful of the Planning Commission, the consultants, the applicant, and those in the audience. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. The timer in front right here will have the yellow light turn on when you have 1 minute left, and the red light comes on that indicates that your time is up. This is an opportunity for residents to provide comment. It is not a discussion or a debate. We respectfully request that you refrain from talking, clapping, or cheering during the meeting. So at this time, I open up the public hearing for this item on the agenda. If there's anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on this item, please come forward at this time.
Good evening. My name is Anthony Randazzo. I reside at 171 Harrington Drive in Troy, Michigan. And first and foremost, I guess I want to give kudos to the Planning Commission for the types of questions that they asked because they were questions that I myself had. But my comment would be it just seems awkward for this particular building to be, you have to be accessible to the front. There's minimal parking. Most of the parking's in the back, and you got to walk around to the front. That's pretty inconvenient. I don't know if there's a solution to that, but this just seems like a little bit of an awkward situation for a person who might be interested in going to one of these 4 businesses. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, sir. Please sign in. Did you sign in? Anyone else wishes to speak? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Bring it back to the table for further discussion, comments, or resolution. Mr. Hudson.
I'm a little conflicted right now. I thought I knew what I was doing when we reviewed this initially, but after Mr. Tagle's comments regarding the placement of the building, my conflict is I tend to agree with him. I think it should be pushed back a little further. But on the other hand, I respect entrepreneurs and developers who come with us and have a plan that they like. And I guess I'm up in the air right now. I want to support the developer. It looks like a good plan. Looks like a great project. I think it's needed there. But looking at the closeness to Crooks Road, I'm thinking Mr. Tagle is probably more right than wrong in suggesting that maybe it should be moved a little bit and have the focus coming in off of Crooks Road instead of drifting in through adjoining parking lots.
Maybe we should give the applicant or the applicant's representative an option or to come up and we can discuss that again, see if that's something that maybe was their initial plan to actually push the building further back, and if that's something they would like to reconsider actually as being their first option. Question for the applicant, is that something that was in the planning stages, something that you wanted to actually push the building further back east? To the east? Well,
actually, again, we were maybe misinterpreted some early conversations that we had to, what you're doing on Big Beaver, for example, where you put the buildings right up to the street, that was really the preferred direction. And so we were kind of fighting for parking spaces along the Crooks Road side. I think from the retailer standpoint, they would probably prefer more parking on the Crooks Road side, so that is something we would definitely consider. I think that's definitely possible.
Mr. Carlisle, is that something that we would want to see another site plan that's reconfigured with a different location of that building? And it would obviously impact the drive-through aisle, it would impact the spaces being moved to the west of the building. Is that something you'd want to take care of administratively, or we want to see the actual design of that site plan?
Ultimately, it's up to the planning commission. If you feel comfortable for us in reviewing administratively, I will know it will be a significant change to the site plan and layout itself, and so you probably would want to see it again, provided that if you're shifting parking and drive aisle locations, et cetera, it would alter the site plan pretty significantly.
Okay. Mr. Hudson.
I think it should be up to Mr. Goss and his clients as to what he wants to do rather than what we suggest he should do. If it meets all the old code requirements and he's satisfied with getting more space up front and there's no harm done, I would leave the decision up to him. Not suggest that, well, maybe we might want to take a look at it. If he says we want to take a look at it and maybe give an alternate plan, fine. If not, we'll use the site plan before us.
Right. But in order to do that, we wouldn't be approving tonight's site plan because that would give the applicant a green light to move forward. So we would actually want to see the site plan before us to give the applicant an opportunity to actually ask the client himself. Is that correct? I mean, you'd want to consult with your client before making any modifications if they actually want to make these changes.
I guess our preference would be to get the site plan approved as is, and if we had to come back for a revised site plan, to submit it at that time. It's certainly, now that we know that the Planning Commission would support something like that, to some extent it has to do also with the tenants and what their desires are. We may find some tenants that say to us, we'd like more parking out front, and we would be coming back for a modification of the site plan and go through the process again. So from our standpoint, we'd prefer to get the entitlement approved and then kind of have the market tell us what it's really looking for.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Mr. Tagle.
Excuse me, I have a question or just a comment. Do you know how many standard parking spaces are in front of your building, not including the barrier-free? There's
Not
8.
Not off the top of my
There's
head.
8 parking spaces for 4 tenants, not including the barrier-free. Are you telling us that really is an adequate proportion?
I guess my question, sir, would be all of the new development that you put along Big Beaver, there's 0 parking spaces in front of the buildings. All of them are behind. So I guess I'm not following the logic.
In my mind, there's a difference. If there's no parking up there, there's no parking. But if I'm seeing parking spaces and there's only 8 available spaces to the potential customer, it's more of a frustration than it is there's no parking up there, and I realize that.
Well, visually, you've got a sea of parking there. When you pull into the parking lot, we added parking to the south. As you can see, that's all essentially new parking that's been added to it. So I think when people pull in, it'll be easy to see that there's parking near the building. But I take your point, and again, we may very well come back and say we'd like to add another row of parking there, and it sounds like the Planning Commission would probably look favorably on that.
Mr. Crane.
You pointed out the Big Beaver situation. You got to remember that they have store entrances to every store from that parking lot behind the building, so it's quite different. You have no door access, so that's apples and oranges.
Fair enough.
Thank you. Ms. Cruz.
I don't hate the idea of the retail space there, but I do struggle with respect to the safety and the pedestrians having no way to get to the retail space except around the front, and then potentially having to walk through a drive-through to get there. And even though we might be able to put certain modifications, as suggested by Mr. Krent, in place to protect our pedestrians, I'm not convinced that having a drive-through is a necessity. I mean, I understand that we discussed it under the special use zoning, that if there was going to be a drive-through, it would need to be a special use, but that doesn't mean there has to be a drive-through as part of the special use zoning. So, when you're already putting something in a parking lot, and people are walking through the parking lot, then walking through the drive-through to get around to the front, I'm just not entirely convinced that we don't have a bigger safety issue than maybe what we're really looking at as we focus on where the building should sit.
Any other thoughts, comments on moving a resolution for this, or giving the client, the customer, or the applicant an opportunity to actually submit a revised version? Ms. Cruz?
So then that begs the question, if my concern is people walking through a parking lot, having to navigate their way through a drive-through lane to get inside the building, should it not have rear access, John? I mean, would adding entrances or access to the building from behind make more sense?
Well, the only issue is that you're now still walking through the drive-through window, or the drive-through stack-up. To answer your question, yes, but the drive-through, I think the safety aspect of that does not make that a great option.
So maybe it would be, if you eliminated the drive-through and you eliminated people having to walk through a drive-through lane to get to the front of the building, you could add doors to the back of the building, making just general access to everyone easier? I kind of, to me that connects dots. Does that not connect dots for anybody else? I mean, that just makes sense that maybe you get rid of the drive-through. That really the kind of tenant that it attracts is okay. You get rid of the drive-through lane, you take away the safety concern, and you give the people who are coming to the retail space access from behind the building and not make them walk all the way around to the front where there's only 8 parking spaces, taking away the barrier-free.
I understand what you're saying. I think there's potentially 2 safety issues, right? The parking lot and the depth that you'd have to walk through the drive aisles, and then transgressing through the drive-through. So they're both issues. But I guess the question I had this for staff. You know, the applicant said currently, you know, that parking lot exists and people walk through that parking lot to get to the office building. Are there safety requirements or pedestrian requirements in that parking lot, or is it based on our opinion of safety and what the pedestrians should have access to navigate through that parking lot?
One of the recommendations we made to the applicant was to provide a pedestrian connection from the office building to this development.
Those down here, right? Yeah.
Which it's not working,
The
so
ones in
I'll
black,
use the mouse.
right?
So technology is failing me right here. You know, there's a lot of parking lots in Troy, and there's not a lot of pedestrian connectivity like this. So this is an opportunity, recognizing that people, and the goal is for people to walk there, to not get in their car. Right. I mean, there's a lack of amenities in this area, and this is directly addressing that lack of amenities. So this is a situation that I think is better than most situations in the city for comparable type developments.
Okay.
Are there large office buildings that lack this type of direct connectivity? Yes, there are. And you know, that's most parking lots don't have pathways like this through them. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
You are answering my question. Yeah.
So just to piggyback on Mr. Salvadan's comment, what I'm seeing here is the applicant is proposing a project where additional design features and additional connectivity was provided to improve that safety and to enhance the safety of that parking lot. Now, the drive-through, there's only certain elements of safety you can implement to actually provide that, the crosswalks there and the pedestrian access, and they've provided that on the southern end of that project. And I think similar to what the applicant has stated earlier, sometimes these parking lots are, the access from a parking lot to the actual building itself, bar pedestrian crosswalks everywhere. The typical access is through the drive aisles and through the parking spaces. That's very typical. And from this layout, they've actually implemented additional features to provide safety for pedestrians. So that's really what I'm saying. Any other thoughts, Mr. Hudson?
I'd like to bring this to a head. The developer has indicated he'd like approval tonight. I suggest that I'm going to move a resolution for approval if the members of this panel believe there are significant issues that really are not addressed by this resolution. They vote no, and at least the developer will have an indication of what to do.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Stanzik.
I'd almost propose something else, and not to be different to Mr. Hudson's recommendation, but I think considering the time of year, considering that it's December, he probably won't start any construction until the spring. I think there's plenty of time for us to postpone this item for 2 weeks, give the applicant a chance to review it, to go over it, and because I do feel uncomfortable if it's unsafe for the pedestrians. There's enough issues that have been brought up by the Planning Commission that are a concern to us, and I think another option would be to postpone it, let the applicant take another look at it, considering the time of year, and go ahead from that. But it's obviously we can go ahead with a motion from Mr. Hudson, and if he so wishes. But I almost recommend postponing it.
Well, let me suggest that perhaps Mr. Sanzika's suggestion is not out of way. I hate to have this thing denied and then have to start the process all over again, bringing it back before us for reconsideration. So if you want to move for a 2-week adjournment, I would certainly second that, but and forego moving for the approval of the resolution.
Yeah, Mr. Savana.
A 2-week adjournment would schedule a public hearing on Christmas Day. I won't be here. Our next meeting scheduled is January 8th.
Yeah. Ms. Cruz.
If we do decide to give the applicant time to make some of the changes that we've addressed here at the table tonight, I would like to suggest to the applicant that he come back with improved renderings of the project. I see one page in my packet that is like a full color photo of a finished product. And I would like to gently remind the applicant that not everyone that sits on this board has an engineering or architectural background. And so those three-dimensional colored renderings are very helpful, particularly when they are put in light of the buildings, the neighborhood, and the street that surrounds it.
Mr. Krant.
I tend to agree with both Mr. Sanzika and Mr. Tagle.
Not Mrs. Cruz.
And yes, you too, dear. So John's point about the safety, and if my suggestion, and again, take it for what it's worth, move that building all the way back east so that it's actually closer for the office people to get to it. You don't have to go through parking lots or as much parking space, and create a bigger front parking area for people having to drive in. So if you move that building back all the way to the east, you've got a drive-through that's away from traffic, pedestrian traffic completely. And I think it may be something that could solve all these problems with pedestrian access to the office building next door and parking up front for the people coming from Crooks Road.
Okay, thank you. So who's going to make the motion?
I'll make a motion to postpone this item, but I'd like to know from the developer what date they think they could be ready for those kind of changes. Because these are substantial changes. These are not just simple, erase it and draw a new line.
Okay, hear you loud and clear. By the way, I'd just like to again point out that the conflict with the pedestrians crossing through the drive aisle perhaps could be resolved by not asking us to put a pedestrian crossing through the drive aisle. We didn't provide that, and so anyway, we're trying to solve a problem we didn't really have. At any rate, as far as tabling the meeting, I suppose if we could ask to be on the agenda in January, if we found that we needed more time, we could postpone again, I suppose, but that would put us into high gear to try to come back with some other ideas. But you're right, the submittal package is fairly complete here at the City of Troy, and so we'd like to, I guess, look at it. Clearly, we can add some elevations. That's not difficult, but to completely re-engineer the site and do some of the things that were suggested tonight, we'll have to give that some real consideration. The other thing is that the tenants don't like to be too far back. It's this balancing act between being visible when people are moving down Crooks Road at speed, that they don't want to be too far back and get missed completely. So it's a balancing
there's always a balance.
So I guess on that, I guess we'd be willing to accept the tabling until a future meeting, and we'll come back.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Krant.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to postpone this item until sometime in a meeting in January if the developer is ready at that time.
Mr. Savidan, do we need to read the entire resolution for the postponement?
No, I don't think so. If your postponement is based on the comments that were generated at this evening, that can be. I'd like to briefly speak about the pedestrian connectivity across the drive-through lane. It was our feeling that if you don't have, and I understand Mr. Tatel's concern with the conflict between pedestrians and the drive-through lane, but human nature being as it is, people tend to want to take the shortest distance. The shortest distance is a straight line, and without a pedestrian crossover or two as we propose, people will still cut across that island. And if you put big enough landscaping or a wall or large enough hedges there, they're going to use the drive aisle and go around it. So it's really addressing human nature and trying to get people across that safely. So that was where we were coming from. I'm just trying to give you some. We absolutely did encourage that the connectivity, but that was what we were trying to address.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Cruz.
I appreciate that you're trying to keep the pedestrians safe, and I would expect nothing less than what it was that you suggested. But I will tell you that I'm sitting here now looking at a sketch that Mr. Tagle did in a nanosecond that completely solved the problem. Completely solved the problem, where you don't need to do what you've suggested, and they don't have to worry about having a drive-through. So there's a solution out there. And it took this guy that long to figure it out. But thank you for keeping our pedestrians in Troy safe.
Ms. Fowler.
Well, when I'm looking at this, obviously the drive-through is driving this whole issue. So is it possible the drive-throughs ever not wrap around the building? If that drive-through didn't wrap around the back of the building and there were openings in the back of the building so people would have access from those other parking areas into the building, then I think the problem's solved. It's just the problem with that drive-through wrapping around the building, which is driving this whole project.
Is that your solution?
Yep.
Pressing it.
You could probably hire him for a price. I'm just saying.
It was a motion supported.
Not yet. Moved by Mr. Krant and supported by Mr. Sanzika. Any other comment before the roll call? Roll call, Ms. Sarnicki, please.
Ms. Fowler?
Let me make sure I know what we're voting on. We're voting on
Postponement.
postponement.
Yes.
Correct. Yes.
Is that a yes, ma'am?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krant?
Yes.
Mr. Zanzika?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Aphidian?
Yes.
Ms. Cruz?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Item is postponed. Moving on to item number 6 on the agenda, public hearing, conditional rezoning, file number CRJPLN 2018-005, proposed Long Lake Square Townhome, south side of Long Lake Road, west of Livernois, 121 West Long Lake, parcels 88-20-16-200-007 and 008, section 16, from R1B, One Family Residential District, to NNM, Neighborhood Node M District. Mr. Carlisle.
Thank you. The request tonight is to conditionally rezone a approximate 1.9 acre site. The site is located on the south end of Long Lake Road, just west of Livernois. It's currently zoned R1B, and the request is to rezone it to NN neighborhood node. The 1.88 site is actually two parcels. If the Planning Commission is familiar, this site was actually came before the Planning Commission as a proposed self-storage and small retail building. The Planning Commission recommended approval of that use and that rezoning, and the Planning Commission and the application was ultimately denied by the City Council. Again, I want to note a condition of the rezoning tonight is the site plan. With regards to the site plan, in front of you is the proposed site plan. It's 30 units. They are spread out in 10 building clusters of 3 units each. Each individual unit is 3 stories in height and includes a garage on the first floor. All access to the site will be off of Long Lake Road. When we look at rezonings, we consider what can be done by right versus what is being proposed. Obviously, the biggest change in as a result of rezoning is the density. Under R1B, the applicant is able to get 1,500 square feet per unit. That equates to about 2.9 units an acre. They're proposing a density of 30 units on 1.8 acres, so again, it's about 15.9 units an acre. The proposed height in the R1B is 2.5 stories or 30 feet. The applicant is requesting 3 stories and 34 feet. The setbacks are similar. The R1B is 40 feet. They're proposing 30 feet front setback, and they're maintaining the same rear yard setback that would be required under the R1B. In the open space, the applicant under R1B would be at 30%. The applicant is requesting the 37% open space. With regards to zoning, the site is outlined in red in front of you. Again, it's currently zoned R1B. Again, they're requesting to go to neighborhood node. There's neighborhood node to both the east and northeast of the site. There's R1B to the south and to the west, and there's RT to the north of the proposed site. So this would be a continuation, essentially, of the neighborhood node that's located at the corner of Long Lake and what's the Is that? Livernois. Oh, Livernois, excuse me. I lost my track there. So as we noted, the site is master planned to be neighborhood node. The neighborhood nodes are concentrated areas at the location of major mile intersections. They're intended to be mixed-use nodes with commercial and retail and residential located within them. For this neighborhood node specifically, it was noted that neighborhood node M, should remain predominantly commercial, catering to the local and regional traffic. It did also state that opportunities for integrated residential and office development can be considered for this node. We do note that, again, this was the proposed site for self-storage facility and small retail. Again, the Planning Commission did recommend approval of that use. However, the City Council denied it. While the master plan specifically calls for this neighborhood node for development of primarily commercial, in public hearing discussions at the time of the self-storage, the neighbors alluded that they would rather see it developed as residential. The site itself does feature 2 non-regulated wetlands. The large one in the southern end of the site is approximately 10,000 square feet. The smaller one, more in the center of the site, is 1,000 square feet. Both of those are proposed to be removed as part of the development. The site has significant tree cover. We do note that the applicant has submitted a tree survey, but it did appear incomplete after our first review because it didn't account for portions of the site, specifically portions along the northern end of the site. I've had further conversation with the applicant, who noted that they are going out and resurveying it, and they do not think that the northern end of the site qualifies for a woodland. But again, we have not seen that revised tree survey to confirm those findings. Based on the tree survey, there will be some additional tree mitigation or preservation that may be required as part of the development. In regards to the parking arrangement, our site arrangement and the parking, we do note that the buildings are placed along the Long Lake build-to line. Again, this is a requirement of the neighborhood node. That's in order to build a street wall on Long Lake and better screen the parking and circulation area behind the buildings. If rezoned, it does comply with all the neighborhood zoning requirements in regards to setback and bulk, etc. We do note with regards to parking, there are going to be 2 spaces within each garage. In addition, there are 12 guest parking spaces located more in the central area of the site. So in total, there are 72 parking spaces for 30 units. understanding traffic would be an issue of discussion tonight. The applicant did provide a traffic study for the city's traffic consultant, OHM, to review. Based on that traffic study, the peak AM hour, so again, the peak AM hour is a 1 hour period in between 7 and 9 in the morning, and the peak AM hour is a 1 hour time period between 4 and 6 in the evening. Based on peak hours, or peak traffic during peak hour, they expect a total of it to generate 15 cars in the morning and 20 or so approximate cars in the evening. Again, those are peak hour, 1 hour traffic amounts, 15 in the morning and 30 or 20 in the evening. OHN does recommend the rezoning traffic study, and notes that the additional traffic would only be an additional approximate 14 trips compared to what could be done by right under our 1B zoning. The applicant has provided a complete landscape plan. We do note that they are proposing buffering along Long Lake, as well as the commercial site to the east, as well as to the theater site to the west. They are providing 19 trees along Partridge Drive. It does not appear and was not indicated in the plans that any fence or wall is proposed along Partridge Drive for an actual physical buffer between them and the residents on Partridge Drive. The exterior elevation is shown in front of you. It's a primarily masonry first and second floor with siding on the second and third story above. This is a proposed site in context with the surrounding area. Again, you can notice that the commercial site is in the background, and the Ridge Player site is in the foreground, with the Partridge Drive folks to the rear of the site. Again, these are 3 stories in height. This is a rezoning. There are rezoning standards that the Planning Commission should consider, including the consistency with the master plan, the potential increase of nonconformity, whether the site can be served by public for services and facilities, whether or not the rezoning would impact public health, safety, and welfare, and lastly, will ensure a compatibility with adjacent uses of land. We do note that when considering the conditional rezoning, the location of the site should be taken into context. The site does front on a major mile road adjacent to a busy shopping center, but again, it's also adjacent to single family to the rear and a lower density condominiums across Long Lake. So conceptually, we support the rezoning to multifamily residential, as we do find that multifamily is a appropriate transitional use for this site. However, in review of the multifamily, we do note there are multiple types of multifamily in terms of both housing type, scale, and product. So with that being said, and understand the contextual relationship of the property, we asked the Planning Commission to consider, is a 3-story, 34-foot tall building appropriate as a transitional use for this site? Is the proposed density of 15.9 acres an appropriate transitional use for the site? Is this a creative use or creative layout of the site that provides approximate amenities to the future residents and the natural features on the site? And lastly, is the proposed architecture appropriate for the site? We do note in our report there are some deficiencies in the application, specifically the tree survey, the elevations which the applicant has provided today, a 3D model of the site, which I included in the presentation, which was included today, as well as a photometric plan. Because of those deficiencies, we didn't find that we could make a recommendation either for or against this project in light of the rezoning standards. So we are asking the Planning Commission tonight to hold a public hearing and consider public testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carlisle. Any questions from Mr. Krent?
Just a quick one. You showed a slide earlier that compared what's by right and with the new zoning for open space. I just wanted to get those numbers in my head again. Okay, so the open space is by right is they have to have 30%, only 30% lot coverage, and they're getting more lot coverage with the 37.23%. So there's less open space. Am I reading it wrong?
Right. So the open space is the maximum lot coverage, and that's the amount of building that can cover a lot. So under R1B zoning, you can cover 30% of your lot with a building. They're proposing to cover 37.23 of the total site with buildings.
Okay, so that's less open space
than would be under R1B.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions from Mr. Carlisle? Yes. Mr. Savanah.
The applicant gave us this bird's eye rendering. I received it today, and I had I was booked with meetings solid most of the day, so I was not able to input this into your agenda packet. It was incorporated into the PowerPoint presentation, but to make this part of the public record, we made copies of it and handed it out. So it is before you for your consideration this evening.
Thank you.
Also, we received an email from Mr. and Mrs. James that was entered into the public record. That's before us this evening.
If there are no other questions for Mr. Carlisle at this time, we can ask the applicant to come forward and present the project.
Jim Clark, 6905 Telegraph Road, Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. I'm president of Robertson Brothers, and I just wanted to do a brief introduction, and then Tim Lochran, who's here with me tonight, is going to give some of the details of the plan, maybe a few things that haven't been described. Just by way of background, we're delighted to be back in Troy. Robertson Brothers has a long history in Troy. So I thought maybe I'd read a few of the projects we've done, just because I'm getting old and it amuses me. But some of the oldies but goodies that Robertson has completed in the past, and there are 11 total projects, is Charnwood Forest, Pine Hill, Hickory Heights Woods, parts of Oak River and Strawberry Hill, and more recently, North Point 1, 2, and 3 at the corner of Big Beaver and Adams, Northwick on Rochester Road, Chatfield Commons, Kilmer Place, and this elevation in these houses are exactly the same elevations in houses as we went through this planning commission a number of years ago and got approved at great lengths and built on Kilmer Place, which is on Big Beaver behind the Saitai restaurant in the parking lot of Bahama Breeze. Bradley Square, which we just finished on Rochester Road in the area of Waddles, and our neighboring project, which is the Glens at Carlson Park in Carlson Park, so which is just south of Long Lake and immediately west of us. So delighted to be here, and I'll turn it over to Tim, and Tim and I will answer questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. Tim Lochran. 6905 Telegraph Road, Robertson Brothers Homes, Bloomfield Hills. I'll be brief because I'd much rather get your feedback and answer your questions. If I could just quickly hand out, I've got a little bit more context for you, if that's okay. Great. Okay. So, and just to point out, Commissioner Krent, you'd actually brought up the lot coverage discrepancy. I believe that 37.23% is actually the amount of open space we have on the development, not the lot coverage. I don't think we provided that calculation. So we're actually 37% plus in open space. So the lot coverage, I believe, is meeting the 30%. We'll certainly verify that, but I'm fairly certain that's where that was a discrepancy. So just briefly again, the concept is to provide high quality, yet affordable missing middle housing typology in the city of Troy. The current zoning of R1B is challenging, and there will continue to be no interest in the property to build 2 single-family homes on what is a major thoroughfare of Long Lake Road. So ultimately, some sort of higher intensity use will be built there. The neighborhood, as I know you know, the neighborhood strongly encouraged residential uses when speaking at the public hearings for the previous proposal for mini storage. We have the experience of building townhomes directly adjacent to R1B in the city of Troy, in 2 other locations which Jim had mentioned, and they're really great examples of appropriate transitional land use, in our opinion. So while it might be higher density than some envision, the simple fact of the matter is that the land is suited for commercial uses. It dictates a land value that requires this type of density. The alternatives would be anything in the commercial node districts, including retail, mini storage, drive-throughs, car repair service, restaurant or bar, etc. So I just wanted to kind of point that out, that what we're proposing really is, I think, a very good transitional use from the commercial to residential. In reviewing the staff report, we think we may be better suited for the neighborhood node type B. This is meant as a lower density transition type and permits townhomes as a principal use rather than the special land use. So that is what we actually had applied for. Either way, we'd be developing under the Building Form C in the Troy Zoning Code, which governs the dimensions and placement of the townhome buildings. And I believe we actually meet all requirements of the building form in terms of lot coverage, building height, setbacks, the alley garage placement, et cetera. So we are meeting those requirements in the form-based code. We feel that this is a proper use of transitional land use from a higher intensity commercial to lower density residential, which is located, as I mentioned, on a major thoroughfare. The plan is a flat grade 1,500 square foot attached residential townhome, owner occupied townhome. These are all for sale units. They all come with a private 2-car garage, and they're completely unstacked units. Nobody's living on top of each other. It's basically, each is like a single-family home together. They have their, obviously the garage, and then the second floor would be your dining area, kitchen, your living area, and then the third floor are the bedrooms, either a 2 or 3 bedroom. The home buyers would actually have the selection of that. And by the way, they would select which unit they want, how many bedrooms they'd want, and then we have a design center in our headquarters, our main office, where they can come in and basically choose any types of finishes on the granite, the countertops, that sort of thing. As Jim mentioned, this is essentially the same product that you had approved at Kilmer Place, and that was that was kind of a give and take with you at that point. That product we have built and repeated in other communities with a lot of success. So we're very proud of this, and this really is the genesis of where this housing product had started for us. The buyers meet a profile of Troy residents looking for a top-notch school district and other proximity to employment. They're not looking to pay more for a yard, and that they really don't want to maintain. So I think the important part is we're trying to give an affordable option for buyers. These aren't cheap product by any stretch, but in relation to the typical single-family homes, these really are a value that people are trying to find in Troy, and they're having a really hard time finding that. They're quality neighbors and will collectively keep up the development through an established homeowners association. The homes will be set back 40 feet from the rear property line, and they'll actually be well over 100 feet from any adjacent home. So I just want to address a couple open items in the staff report, and I think Ben had mentioned a couple of them already. Our consultants did confirm that the tree survey is actually correct. The vast majority is small scrub and tree saplings. The larger trees that weren't picked up were actually dead trees out there. So the tree survey, per our professional consultants, who are obviously are experts at this, are telling us that the tree survey is correct, so it would not need to be updated. There was a comment about adding a sidewalk to the west side of the drive. We are amenable to that if that's how the Planning Commission sees fit. It would require us to shift the buildings a little bit more to the west, closer to the side property lines. I think regardless, we'd still be meeting both the R1B and the node district standards by moving that a little bit farther to the west. The trash pickup, there was a comment about trash pickup, how that would be accomplished. It's just like every other townhome that we build. Each homeowner has their own trash in their garage. They bring it out on trash day. There is no central collection trash enclosure, so it is all done hidden away, and the HOA regulates even when the driveways can be up, so that's out of view. As Ben mentioned, we did submit elevations today, which are dimensioned, so you should have that information. And the last thing is the photometric. Really, we know we don't have a final site plan. You haven't even seen this yet. Photometrics usually come a little bit later. So once we get closer to a final site plan, of course, we just submit the photometrics. I know that's an important factor. So we're certainly happy to be in front of you again, and we're willing to listen to all the feedback you can give us and answer any questions. So thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant at this time? No questions? Ms. Cruz?
I'm curious about your architecture and the fact that you have repeated the elevation in several locations in Troy, and also I recognized the townhomes as being across the street from like the Miner's Den and the Hanson's Running Shop there in Royal Oak at 13 and Rochester Road. Are you going for a Robertson look? I mean, are you wanting your townhomes to be immediately recognizable as a Robertson townhome? Or is it just a matter of it ain't broke, so we're not going to fix it?
I'll let Jim answer.
Every community has requirements that they're very particular about. In the case of Royal Oak, they love the elevations that, I don't mean this in an inappropriate way, that you came up with. And so we presented them with the anticipation that they might have some feedback on them, and they said no, they liked them. So we built them twice, as opposed to bringing something new. And the buyers like them. So if elevations are something that this Planning Commission wants us to work on, we would plan on working on elevations. We like the look, we think they're very attractive, but no, we don't have to build thousands of them. It's just the two other communities we built them in liked those elevations. We did change the colors and made modifications and added a second product type when we built them in Ferndale. So we actually have a mix of a one-car garage and these same two-car plans. So it's a wonderful mix where they interplay with both color and building massing.
Well, here in Troy, we did adjust our ordinances so that, you know, in a single-family home situation, you know, in a neighborhood, if you will, we don't have that repetition of elevation. So there, I mean, I don't want to speak for everybody, but I do think that we do have an appreciation for design standards. We have an appreciation for design creativity. And I'll be just perfectly honest with you, when I saw the elevations, I sort of slapped my head and I immediately thought of all of the amber apartment buildings that have a signature look and they all look the same, and you look at those amber buildings and you're like, that's an amber apartment. So I'm afraid that if you stick to only one elevation and one design, you're just going to be a higher end Jerry Amber, right? You're going to immediately just know, oh yeah, that's a Robertson building. And maybe that's good, that's bad, that's neutral. But without that creativity in design, I'm not sure that as a builder, you maintain the kind of reputation that maybe you're seeking, given the other projects that you've done in the city. That's my feedback.
So noted, we would work with the Planning Commission to create elevations that were met with your expectations. And we've done it we have thousands of different homes with thousands of different elevations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Mr. Ortega.
As far as site amenities for the people that are going to own, what is there? I mean, I have to be honest with you. I mean, I understand the site is of certain proportions, but it just seems so regimented. I mean, you've got a straight street going down here, and there's really no softness to it or no interest to it. There's no focal point at the end of the street other than some more trees or more landscaping. And honestly, I have to, the artist's rendition is, and again, I've not looked at the site this closely, but I'd say they're a little bit aggressive on how much vegetation is really out there. So I think even taking that into consideration, the height and the massing of these buildings, you've got the one-story shopping center with parking, and then you've got the Ridgedale parking. I mean, these things are really going to seem very vertically prominent on this piece of property. But back to the question about the amenities and softness of the planning.
Sure, I guess to answer that, we did have a couple different iterations of a site plan. And I don't want to say that you know, everything's a blank slate, because obviously we've moved toward a, you know, toward a certain goal here. You know, we'd come in and met with staff, and I think what their direction was, which I appreciate the direction, is to really have a you know, more of a front along Long Lake Road. Before, I think we had one building there, and we had them kind of siding, facing toward the commercial, and then it kind of went in, and it's hard for me to explain, but it kind of went in and it meandered a little bit, so it wasn't just so regimented. So I agree with you. I think we probably have some of that same thought process as well. So as far as it being set in stone, I don't know if that's necessarily the case, but that is sort of how we got to that position. So I agree, it's a very small site, it's less than 2 acres, so there's only so much you can do on it. So as far as the layout, this is really what we came up with. I think once you start looking at it from this direction, I think it kind of gives a cohesion, but I understand where you're coming from. As far as the amenities, you know, when we have projects this small, they're typically not looking for a, you know, large, you know, community center, pool, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
I'm not even thinking necessarily of another building, but I'm thinking of an outdoor amenity, you know, somewhere where, you know, is there a pavilion somewhere? You know, sometime you were somewhere in the summertime, people could gather or talk, or benches, or, you know, variety of things.
I agree. We could certainly look into doing some type of you know, pedestrian node, if you will. Perhaps we've done community gardens in some projects as well, and obviously it's a little bit smaller scale, but we can certainly look into doing something of that nature.
Ms. Cruz?
I think Jim wants to add.
Sorry to do all the jumping up. What you don't read in this soldiering, if you will, of the buildings is there is a wonderful courtyard between each buildings, and the buildings are pushed together, so there is a hidden auto court, if you will, in that the buildings are pushed together. The backs of each building have the decks and the auto court, and then you do have a wonderful open space, which is it's not exaggerated, it's extenuated, it's further apart, and you do have a gathering area in the center of the fronts of all of those buildings, with the exception of the ones that are on Long Lake Road. So you have a nice green area to your front door in every case, and then an auto court in the back. So the reason these stacked up like that was to provide that little courtyard between every 2 buildings. So it doesn't read when you see it in perspective, but it does in a plan view, and we can certainly work on that.
Actually, the 3rd page that I just provided you, Kilmer shows that, and that's sort of where that design element came in. So you're right, it really does not show on this.
You know, it would, and again, I don't see how you could do this, but you know, where you've got your 6 or your 3 parking spaces on each side of that pedestrian, or that garden, or that center area, you know, that would really be nice if that was more green than more asphalt. But I don't know, you know, how you do that and give some visitor parking or guest parking, you know.
Ms. Cruz?
Just another comment that I thought of. When we had originally approved the storage facility, one of the things that the storage facility had proposed, where the wetland area was in the back, was to preserve that and create like a park-like setting that neighbors that were in the single-family homes behind the property would be welcome to enjoy. And so as I look at all of the housing there and the density, and to Mr. Tagle's point, adding something where residents who live there can be more communal or be more of a community and come together and picnic tables or benches or the pavilion or more of a park-like might be something that is really nice, because I've noticed on your buildings where you have the, what did you call it, the auto court? Was that the term of art for that, the auto court over the driveways? They're pretty small patios. I mean, you're not getting too much in the way of seating or people on those little balconies. Thank you. Yes.
So you're saying you're taking the back of the units specifically?
Yeah, I'm just saying as you think about that site, you do have the wetlands, and I mean, as it's proposed, you've decided to eliminate it. But, you know, would it be a terrible thing to keep some of it and take it up a notch in terms of quality and aesthetics and ambiance for the residents to have a place, because like I said, the balconies are pretty small.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate the thought. You know, from a standpoint as far as the wetlands, I mean, it is under 2 acres. It would have to be, the site really has to be mass graded. It really doesn't have much room to lend to that. But to your point, on the south side of it, you know, we were really looking more like a tree buffer more than anything to the south. That's certainly an area, since we have such a big setback. I think we have almost a 50-foot setback to that property line. Perhaps there are some areas there that I think there's some parking back there. If we could obviously make some of that area more of a communal type of amenity, we can certainly look at that.
Mr. Tagle.
I know you guys have done this many, many times. How would you handle the snow storage on a site like this?
And that's a very good question. We usually do obviously think that out or in the site plan stage. Typically speaking, since there are these courts, as you see, the outer courts, the snow really just gets pushed back. It gets pushed back toward that end where you have some landscaping at the edges of those. So the plan, even though it's very regimented, really kind of is conducive to snow removal for that. And then the HOA would be responsible for all of the sidewalks as well. So it is all part of the HOA that would be covered.
Yeah, I was just speaking from more of a practical standpoint, not who's going to push it. But.
Yeah, no, I understand. Yeah, so it would be going toward the end of the auto courts.
Mr. Quinn.
You know, hopefully we can hear from the residents to the south. Namely, do they want a connection to you? The original plan we saw with the storage unit had a picnic table and other things for the neighbors to the south to use. But I'm just questioning, would they ever cross a street to picnic? Right. But what might be nice is some kind of a pathway, a paved pathway from that, I can't remember the name of that street. Thank you. Partridge, thank you. A sidewalk into this so that we connect those neighborhoods somehow and not just make it a barrier.
Sure, and we'd certainly be amenable to, obviously, what the Planning Commission want and what the neighbors would want. So I don't think we have a...
I'd like to hear from the neighbors if they would like to connect with your development.
I agree.
Thank you. So if we don't have any other questions for the applicant at this time, I'll open up the public hearing. Just a reminder, can you please state your name and sign in on the sign-on sheet when you come up to speak? Mr. Savana.
I was going to reiterate that, so I want to explain a couple things. So this is a proposed conditional rezoning, which the Planning Commission is a recommending body. So they're not going to be receiving approval from the Planning Commission tonight or anytime. Their role is not to approve, is a recommending body. So the final decision on this rezoning, which is tied to the site plan, will be by City Council. I just want to make that clear. And I want to emphasize the importance of writing your name clearly and speaking your name clearly for the public record, because anyone who speaks this evening, the minutes from this meeting will be provided to the City Council. So it's important that there be an accurate public record as this moves forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Savana. And just a reminder that every speaker has 3 minutes to speak, and then when the red light comes on, your time is up. So at this time, I will open up the public hearing. Anyone that wishes to speak, you may please come forward at this time.
Hi, my name is Michelle Weber. My biggest concern with the whole site plan is the same as with the storage unit. It's 3 stories high. It was the main complaint of the residents. And in the final comparison at the end of the storage unit discussion, a lot of you had said, you know, we drove through the area, and it really doesn't fit the aesthetics of the area. If it was 2 stories, I would have absolutely no problem with it. And the one thing I am going to bring up when you mentioned the snow, I live in Harrington Park, and let me tell you, I'm constantly out there talking to the snow removal guy saying, at least let me have 1 car to get out. I'm sorry, with that many units in there, I can guarantee you you're going to have problems with the snow, because I've been fighting it for 15 years over at Harrington Park, and we've even taken our park and extended the cement so that the snow removal can go down onto the cement, so that there's areas for the snow removal and still areas that people can get in and out. So with that much on that little site, I can't even imagine what is happening with that. But I would say my biggest objection is the same as with the storage unit. It's the height of the buildings. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Anthony Randazzo. I reside at 171 Harrington Drive in Harrington Park condos across the way. And to coin a phrase that Ms. Cruz used about aesthetics and ambiance, we have it across the road here. Our two complexes, Charleston and Harrington, they're inviting, they're warm. Are we going to have that here, or are we going to have a repeat of the Stark type buildings that are on Rochester Road, just south of was it Big Long Lake or down there? They're stark. There's nothing inviting about them. So we live in a beautiful community to the north of this. What's this going to look like? Ambiance and aesthetics are very significant. How far are those front buildings going to be from Long Lake? What is a buffer that's proposed for the front? Is it just those few trees? Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishes to speak on this item?
Should I sign in later, or? Okay. Ron Dunlap, I live at 148 Charleston Drive. I'm the president of the association. And we've had a meeting, and we have 3 acres and we only have 12 units. And they're very appealing to the eye. They're mostly solid brick. We have, as I said, 12 units on 3 acres, where this is 30 units on less than 2 acres. And at times we have problems with parking. And our driveways are big enough, all of them, for at least 2 cars in the driveway. These don't even have parking in a driveway for an extra 2 cars. Yeah, they have 2 parking in their garage, but that's it. Ours, we can park our cars in the garage, 2 cars outside the garage, and then parking on one side of the street. And at times, we have an overflow. And we also have snow removal problems. When there's a heavy snow, a lot of times we end up needing to have a removal company come in after the snow plow and remove the snow, because they have no place to push it. And the height of these are drastically too high. They should be 2-story, and they should also be, maybe if every other set of the buildings were turned opposite and half of the buildings were gone, and maybe 15 units instead of 30 would make much more sense and be more appealing to the eye, and would be more common, like you said, space for people to do something or move around, and wouldn't just be jam-packed and stacked on top of each other. So people in Charleston Club across the street. And the other thing is that we were forced to put an egress and egress entrance off of Long Lake Road where we could turn in and slow down, or when we turn out, we had, space where we had to leave before we entered Long Lake Road. And this has nothing. It just, boom, it's right out on Long Lake Road with 30 units, 2 cars in each unit. That's 60 cars. I don't know what he cares about the traffic flow. You're going to have more than 5 cars coming out of there at rush hour in the morning. And you need to have a turn lane going into the project and a turn lane going out, so they're not just, their bumper's not sitting on Long Lake Road. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishes to speak on this at this time? If not, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the table for further discussion. Mr. Hudson.
Mr. Chairman, I was on this commission when that monstrous fortress was proposed on this site. I voted against it at that time because the height. One of the requirements, I believe, of this conditional is this building appropriate as a transitional use? That's a two-part question. I think it's probably an appropriate transitional site with 2 flaws. One, if you'll do a bird's eye view, 360 degrees of Livernois and Long Lake, in a huge semicircle, you'll see nothing above 2 stories, nothing. If you look at the TV screen up here, you can see that we have a 1-story shopping center. On the east side, we have a community playhouse, 1-story with lots of green space on the western side, and a 3-story projection coming out, which is like someone with bad teeth. Some teeth are missing, some are kind of long, but you notice it immediately. This sticks out like use another analogy, a sore thumb. It's inappropriate, I think. If they were to reduce it by 1 story, it's within even perhaps the traditional zoning that we used as a comparison here. This one is 34 feet above the ground, too big. Also too dense. If you were to cut this in half and reduce the 3rd story, it might be an appropriate use. But I think that, again, I can tell you, I'm not going to vote for it as submitted tonight. It's too big, too dense, and is not appropriate for the area surrounding it.
Any other thoughts, comments?
I agree with Mr. Hudson's comment, particularly about the transitionary nature of it. Conceptually, I get that, but visually, it's not. And it to me also seems too dense for the site.
Mr. Carlisle and Mr. Savinat, what is the maximum height limit for an R1B for single-family residential homes that would be allowed on this site?
30 feet.
30? And is that to the mid-height of the roof, or is that to the peak?
It depends what type of roof it is, but if it's a pitched roof, it's to the midpoint.
Okay. And these are 34 at the peak?
No.
The 34 at the...
34 as to where we measure height.
Where the measured height is, okay.
33.
33.
Oh, okay.
About 3.5 feet higher than the ordinance.
Okay.
I get the 6 inches.
Okay.
What? I mean, it's 3 feet 6 inches higher than the ordinance allows.
Mr. Sanzica.
I tend to agree if they echo Mr. Hudson's response and Mr. Faison. It's just, what bothers me more is the environment. You know, the wetlands, they're not being mitigated, and it's just, there's no open space provided for the residents. just seems like they're putting 10 pounds of buildings in a 2-pound box. It's just an overuse of the property, and it's a conditional rezoning, and I really believe that it's being overbuilt, and it really isn't a transitional use in that area. So I too I couldn't vote for this as it's being presented.
So just one thought I have on transitional use. I think we've had this conversation before on other projects on Big Beaver and along other corridors where transitional use is more taken as the transition of what the master planner allows and what can be built for the adjacent properties, not necessarily what is there existing today. Is that am I understanding that correctly, Mr. Savanat? Not so, it's a combination of the existing properties that are there today, but also what of the properties can be redeveloped at in terms of maximum height of what the master plan allows. In looking at transition, I mean, we've dealt with that before with that topic.
Well, I guess how I would answer that would be it incorporates the context of the site in determining appropriateness. I don't know if that's answering your question.
So the context of the site as it exists today, but as also as the context of the site in terms of the master plan, what the master plan allows there in future redevelopment. Can both be taken in context, or
I think that's fair.
Just one,
Mr. Crane.
one quick thought. A lot was mentioned tonight from the developers about a transition. Transition to what? I can't see a transition between 1 stories to 3 stories. Where's the transition? I don't see it. So it's pretty apparent to me that, like Mr. Hudson said, these things stand out. Now, is that what, according to Mr. Happy, Ali was saying, is that, do we have to look at the future of the land use? Is Trevero Hardware going to turn into a 3-story building someday? I'm concerned really in the now, because I don't think Trevero is going to make a big change in the next decade. If anything, the homes directly adjacent to the existing subdivision on the south, those should not exceed the existing residential zoning. So, I guess I agree with everyone's comments on the commission today. Too dense, too tall, and I'd like to see, and again, I'd like to hear from the neighbors, do they want to have some kind of connection to this neighborhood? And if they would, why don't we make some kind of a walkway, at least a sidewalk or something, between the 2 neighborhoods?
Yes, Mr. Sada.
So just to piggyback on what Mr. Krentz said, so when we talk about transition, we're talking about that area where 2 incompatible or 2 different zoning districts meet. So the transition is we look at placing the burden on transition in this instance on the more intense district, which is neighborhood node, which allows a higher height and more intensity as it relates to the less intense lower height of the single-family residential.
So back to my earlier comment, the transition really is between the neighborhood node, what's permitted there, and even what's permitted in terms of future redevelopment. That's what the transition is toward, stepping down to the residential and
yes,
or to the west.
Because we're less concerned about the relationship with the Trevero Hardware property to the east, because it has the rights to more intensity if it's redeveloped, versus the property to the south and to the north. They're limited in terms of, we know what they're going to be. They're going to be 2-story, 30-foot tall buildings. So that's where that transition is more important.
Any other thoughts, comments at this point?
I do have one, I think.
Yeah, Mr. Hudson.
We have, in the city of Troy at least, have a philosophy of transitioning, if you will, using that same word of transition, from the old zoning concept of we segregate the city into zones by uses. We've come through that, and all the experts now in Troy has, in essence, adopted it in its master code in sections. Form-based zoning. An example would be maybe on Big Beaver, where you have some very tall buildings, like a pyramid, sloping down. That's a form that seems to be easy to use. The form we've got here in this intersection is a flat one with a projected 3-story protrusion out. You know, that just destroys the form of this whole intersection and living area, with the condominiums across on the north side of Long Lake, the subdivision to the south of this parcel, and on the north, more. It just violates, in my opinion, the form-based code idea in this parcel.
So another thought I have on this development is we've already seen a development already come before us that got denied. So this,
Probably for the same reason.
right.
Too big.
So the use, so this is a second type of use that we're being requested for conditional rezoning. If this project gets denied tonight, we're eliminating a second use off of the potential uses for this site, considering the location and the uses, the permitted uses for a conditional rezoning.
No, I don't feel that way. I think I said that I think it's a good transitional project. It's just too big and too dense to do it. But condominiums or apartments on this lot, much smaller in scope, I think would be appropriate. This is too big.
Right, so just to finish my thought there, I think that the density, for a developer, I think bringing this before us, to make this project feasible, it appears that this would be what the density is that they're requesting.
Idea, but it's too dense and it's too tall.
Mr. Senzi.
I have just a question. Maybe you could refresh my memory again. The zoning is an R1B, existing zoning is R1B.
That's correct.
But the master plan is a neighborhood node. Is that correct for this parcel?
It's in an area of transition between neighborhood node and single-family residential. The master plan has got conceptual circles at various intersections, and this is in that area where from a master plan perspective, it could make sense if the transition is appropriate.
Thank you.
Could we go back to that slide where you had the list of questions that we should consider doing this?
Might be going the wrong way.
Right, this one, right. So understanding the contextual relation of this site, the Planning Commission should discuss, is a 3-story walk-up, 34-foot tall building appropriate as a transitional use? I would say there's probably enough people on this board that think that it's not, that's too tall. Is the proposed density of 15.9 units per acre appropriate as a transitional use? I've heard several planning commissioners indicate that it's a little dense. It's too tall, it's a little dense. Is this a creative layout of this site that provides appropriate amenities to the future residents? I think we've discussed that and determined the answer is no. And is the proposed architecture appropriate for the site? I think we've taken that into question. The architecture in terms of height certainly isn't, and maybe repetitiveness isn't ideal. So as I go through those questions, I don't come up with a yes. not a solid yes.
Mr. Senzi.
I think we come to the conclusion that this should be postponed. Let the developer take another look at it, see if he has any alternatives as far as the layout goes, the height of the buildings, better use of the site, in context of the questions, trying to answer that. I think there's a lot of issues here that need to be resolved before, in fact, I would feel comfortable voting for this. So I'd be ready to make a
sure. Go ahead, Mr.
resolution. I understand the developer he did have a comment. Is it appropriate to have him comment now, or would you like me to make the resolution?
Yes. Would you like to make a comment on this, please?
I'd just like a little more direction. I hear it's too intense and too high and not, we failed on 4 of 4. So, we can preserve our ability to be most improved. The density is very important. I don't know that it has to be 30, but this is a challenge site. It's challenged, it's challenged economically. It is on a major thoroughfare. The node does allow up to 55 feet. So when we proposed 3 feet 6 inches more, I understand it's because it's a housing type that's highly desirable. It isn't that we like it to be 3 feet 6 inches higher than the ordinance allows. So we'll look at that. We have done split grade buildings, which brings that overall height down. It's still a 3-story building. It's what we did on Bradley Square. There are 3 floors. That's the only way to efficiently build these type of units to get this product type, which there's a dearth of in Troy, if it's of desirability. So could there be any allowance on the density component with this commission? If we work on architecture, we work on open space, and we work on height.
Any further comments? Do the best you can with them.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Sanzica.
I'm ready. Resolved that the Planning Commission hereby recommends the City Council the conditional rezoning request, which incorporates preliminary site plan approval is per section 1604 of the City of Troy zoning ordinance, located in the south side of Long Lake, west of Livernois, within section 16B, approximately 1.877 acres in size, be postponed to provide the applicant an opportunity to address the issues identified in the report and discussed by the Planning Commission.
Moved by Mr. Sanzica and second by Mr. Faison. Roll call, Ms. Harnicki, please.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Mr. Sanzica?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Abhidian?
Yes.
Ms. Cruz?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Item is postponed. Moving on to item number 7, public hearing, conditional rezoning, file number CRJPLN 2016-001. Proposed Cooper's Hawk Winery and Restaurant, north side of Big Beaver between Troy and Frankton, section 22 from R1E, 1 family residential, to BB Big Beaver District. Mr. Carlo.
If I may.
Yes. Go ahead.
Mr. Sawyer is a proponent of this project. He shares office space with me as an attorney, and I think to avoid any appearance of impropriety or conflict of interest, I should be excused from participating in this discussion. I'd like the commission to go.
Yep. Fine with me.
It's fine. Fine with the planning commission.
Anytime, Mike.
You may be
Maybe
excused.
excused. Thank you.
We take a 5-minute recess.
Yeah, we'll take a 5-minute break.
Hey, you've got to come back.
These are heights. What are
Get back to item number
Yeah,
7. Public hearing, conditional rezoning, file number CRJPLN 2016-001, proposed Cooper's Hawk Winery and Restaurant, north side of Big Beaver, between Troy and Frankton, Section 22, from R1E, one family residential, to BB, Big Beaver District. Mr. Carlisle.
Thank you and good evening. Again, this is another request for conditional rezoning where the condition of approval is a site plan as submitted. The applicant is requesting to rezone a 2.19 acre site in order to develop a 12,000 square foot restaurant. The site is located on Big Beaver, also fronts on both Troy Drive and Frankton Street. Just for clarification to the Planning Commission and to the public, the application needs 4 approvals. The conditional rezoning, a site plan, and a special use. Those are all approved by the City Council based on a recommendation from the Planning Commission, and it also needs 2 variances that is approved by the Zoning Board of Appeals. Because it needs 2 variances, the Planning Commission cannot take action on the item tonight. However, you can hold a public hearing and provide direction to the applicant moving forward. With regard to zoning, the site has split zoning. You'll notice the front parcel that actually fronts on Big Beaver is zoned Big Beaver. The rear parcels, which are 5 parcels, are all zoned R1E. The request is to rezone those R1E parcels to Big Beaver. We note that to the north and to the west and east is also R1E, and to the south and portions of the west and east is zoned Big Beaver and office. With regards to the master plan, this site actually falls into what we deem as our golden corridor, our golden mile along the corridor. It's the primary corridor A within the master plan. Within that designation, the master plan, it calls for a world-class corridor that incorporates the features of service drives with parallel parking, a wide pedestrian walkway and amenities, large trees and planting areas, and pedestrian scale lighting and streetscape. Buildings located at or along the right-of-way with no setback or limited setback, of mixed uses that front the corridor, and highest density within the district. Many of these features the applicant does meet as part of the application, and those that it does not, we will mention. In regards to the master plan and zoning, the master plan, the Big Beaver, we had kind of talked about this at the last application, does talk about the consideration of both the transition in density, both in height and use as you move farther from Big Beaver actually into the neighborhood. One of the long points of discussion and major points of discussion of the Planning Commission at that time was how far should we extend the Big Beaver zoning into the neighborhood? It was determined at that time to only extend it essentially 1 parcel deep into the neighborhood in those parcels that front on Big Beaver. As you'll note, this is one of the shallowest parcels in terms of what's currently zoned Big Beaver in that stretch of zoning. If rezoned those 5 parcels, it would be essentially the deepest zoning of Big Beaver within this stretch of Big Beaver. We do note that part of the reason why the applicant is requesting this many parcels to be rezoned is the size of the building and the parking lot. We do note that they're asking for a 12,000 square foot, 242 seat restaurant, which requires 141 parking spaces. If you look at the table in front of you, it's one of the largest buildings in terms of standalone restaurants on Big Beaver. Only larger is Bahama Breeze and Maggiano's. So again, it's a very large building with a large parking lot associated with it. So similar to the last request before you, we've asked some questions for the Planning Commission to consider in light of the rezoning and special use. And the first is the parking lot the appropriate transition to adjacent residential considering the depth that extends to the neighborhood? Secondly, if a parking lot is appropriate, has the applicant potentially mitigated impacts upon adjacent properties? Issues such as car screening, parking lot mitigation, and hours of operation can be considered. And lastly, is a 1-story building appropriate at this location, or should the applicant consider a multi-story building or a mixed-use project? With regards to the site plan itself, the site itself is outlined in red. You'll notice that the building itself is located in yellow. It's located on the southeast portion of the site itself. We do note that the building and the site has 3 front yards, including Big Beaver, Troy, and Frankton. There is an associated 141 parking spaces with the site, and there are 2 points of access. Both of them are off of Troy Street or Troy Drive. As I noted, there are two required variances that are being sought by the applicant. The first is they have to seek a variance for the build-to line along Troy Drive. There's a requirement within the zoning ordinance that in the form-based district of Big Beaver, all buildings have to be placed at the build-to line, which is 10 feet. Because of the drop-off and the porch here, they're actually pushing the building farther away from Troy Drive than required by ordinance. In addition to that, they are seeking a second variance because they have parking in front of the building. If you notice the number 2, that is a parking area that's located between the street and the building. Again, the form-based district requires that all parking be behind the front end of a building. In regards to landscape and buffering, we do note the applicant is deficient of the required landscaping along Big Beaver. However, they are proposing a very dense screening along the northern property line, which again is adjacent to residential. We do note that there may be some additional screening that may be needed on Troy and Frankton, especially where those parking lot faces the street, where the actual headlight faces the street and the homes across from the street. This is a view of the elevation. This is the view of the site from Big Beaver. You'll notice there's a drop-off area on the side of the building, and again, the building itself fronts 10 feet from Big Beaver. This is a view of the elevation. This is what the view would be as you access the site from Troy Drive. This is the rear of the building. You can see again the drop-off area. This is an elevation of the building from Big Beaver and the Frankton corner. Again, building set close to both Frankton and Big Beaver Road. The applicants propose a very nice streetscape along Big Beaver. And in summary, due to the need for variances, the Planning Commission cannot take action but can provide direction to the applicant. But we do ask the Planning Commission to hold a public hearing and give direction to the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carlisle. Any questions for Mr. Carlisle at this time? Seeing none, we will call the applicant forward to present the project.
Good evening. My name is David Sawyer, and so I just wanted to give you a little bit of history about briefly just who we are and whatnot. This property, my father, who's here tonight, Tom Sawyer, and Joel Garrett began acquiring this property going back to the early 1980s. So we've been holding on to this property for some time, waiting for the right opportunity. And we really think that this is, the right opportunity here. So we've been paying taxes on this property for a long time, and if this project goes forward, we're going to pay a whole lot more on this project. And I'll get to that in a minute. Mr. Garrett, Joel Garrett, was my father's partner in this, and he also worked with my dad in acquiring these properties. And some of you may know or have known of Mr. Garrett. He and his son Dale were lost in a plane crash in 2014. And his daughter Ann is also my partner in this project. And so, who we are, I'm an attorney. I've been practicing law for 20 years here in Troy, and that's why Michael Hudson has recused himself, because he's my law partner. And I have an office building just about a 3-wood from here over on Civic Center Drive, which I also own with Ann and some other partners. And Ann Sobey here with us tonight is Joel's daughter, and our other partner is her brother Dale's widow, Natalie Garrett, who couldn't be here tonight. Ann and I, we own property here in Troy. Ann and I work in Troy. We operate our businesses here in Troy. Together, our families own retail center at Square Lake and Livernois, and some other office buildings here in Troy. So just kind of telling you, we're not some REIT. We're not some developers from New York, Chicago, or Houston. We are Troy. We grew up here. So we have deep family roots here, and we care a great deal about the city and the projects here that we build here in Troy, which is why we're excited to bring you this Cooper's Hawk here. We've chosen Cooper's Hawk for this location over other lesser options. We had earliest interest here in this site was a Tilted Kilt, which I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a restaurant. It's a little like Hooters or Twin Peaks, and we didn't think that was right for Troy and was right for this neighborhood. We also just didn't want another cookie cutter corridor retail center with a mobile phone store, a sub shop, a massage place, or the latest fad workout, or a nail salon. I think we have enough of that. We didn't want a bar scene restaurant either. And so we wanted something different for this location, something special, and we think we found it in Cooper's Hawk Winery and Restaurant. We chose Cooper's Hawk. I went to Orlando to check them out and drove to Indiana to check out the restaurants, and I love it. They have a huge menu. We love the Napa Valley winery concept, and we truly believe this restaurant will be a great addition to this neighborhood and the Troy community as a whole. It's a family-friendly place. It has neighborhood hours. The kitchen closes 9:30 Monday through Thursday, 10:30 Friday and Saturday, and 9 on Sundays. So it's not the kind of place that people are going to be stumbling out of at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's much more of a neighborhood-style restaurant. You know, it's not as expensive as a lot of the other ones we're seeing up and down Big Beaver Road. Average plate's about $28. So it's more family-friendly. So I guess that's about what I had to say about that. If there's any questions at this juncture?
Any questions for the applicant at this point? No questions.
Okay. I don't know if there were any comments or thoughts on the project. I'd be interested to hear. You know, if you wanted to come back up, David, I don't know if you have anything to add.
I don't have anything to add. David Hunter, Professional Engineering, PEA, Inc., the site civil engineer. And we certainly have perspectives here to discuss, and we have a material board. If you guys would like to see the material board for the building. And we're missing a cement board.
Could you circulate?
Fell off.
Could you circulate the material board?
Sure.
Yeah.
It's
one piece fell off, so be careful.
It's a little windy. Well, we're certainly here, and we can answer any questions you may have about the site plan and/or the building.
Okay, thank you. At this point, if we don't have any questions, we'll open up the public hearing and then go from there. So I will open up the public hearing. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on this item on the agenda? Please come forward, state your name, sign in please, and same rules apply as the previous public hearings. 3 minutes on the clock when the red light comes on.
Can I sign after then? My name is Michael Downs. I live at 3074 Troy Drive. I'm the adjacent property owner on the west side of Troy. And my concern with the site plan is the double entrance coming off of Troy Drive, and the probably the delivery trucks pulling into that north side entrance off the side of my driveway. So I would like to see something coming off of Frankton if you're gonna do this, and where you can possibly have your delivery trucks coming off of Frankton, especially since that site on the other side of Frankton is probably going to be developed commercial also. So you're going to have truck traffic over there anyway. So why don't we keep it over there? And then as far as the restaurant goes, I mean, ideally what we'd like to see is Troy Street just barricaded and keep the residential traffic coming in from Heartland and keep the commercial traffic just coming in and out of Big Beaver for Renaissance Spa and the restaurant. That would be ideal. And I think that would be great for the residents, and I think it'd be great for the restaurant and Spa Renaissance too. Otherwise, I think you need to, if you're not going to do that, you need to at least say turn left only out of there and head out to Big Beaver instead of having, we have a lot of traffic coming down Lewis and Troy and Frankton heading for Heartland trying to beat the rush hour traffic. And they're all going between Livernois and Rochester up and down Heartland, and it's already someone's going to die. I mean, the amount of traffic there now is too much, and now you're going to add more. So it really needs to be addressed, the traffic flow. Okay?
Thank you.
That's about it.
Yeah, good evening everyone. My name is Venkata Kotarapu. I live exactly opposite to the planned restaurant. The address is 3049 at Troy Drive, Troy, Michigan. I don't have any issue with the restaurant. It's a good one, but the only one thing is the entrance and exit from Troy Street will increase traffic, maybe several folds. So as Mike mentioned, it would be good that one exit or entrance on the other side of the other street, so we'll reduce some traffic. And as an ideal situation, after my house, if they put some barricade, it will be complete residential place for Troy Drive. But I know it will take some time for us to go around to reach the Livernois or Big Beaver. So these are all two changes I would like to think it's inappropriate to reduce the traffic and good for kids who are in that street. That's all from me.
All right, thank you. Anyone else wishes to speak?
Ron Dunlap. The only problem, I love the looks of the restaurant. I think it looks very nice. I'm sure it'll be a nice establishment. I like the design. The only problem I have is the entrance only being off of Troy Road, which is a residential road. I don't know if we have any other restaurants in Troy where the main entrance is off of a residential road. They're off of some commercial roads in Troy. But I think you definitely need to either have another exit for, like the gentleman said, for trucks, or for another, so they can have their choice. But preferably, I think the entrance should be off of Big Beaver Road. That's what I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. This is Ramesh. I'm at 3123 Frankton Drive. So this is coming way deep into the Frankton Drive, the plant. So which we are a bit concerned about safety, about the traffic and safety around around the neighborhood areas. So the trucks are coming into the neighborhood, and we have houses around it. So I would like to, take a consideration into this one.
Thank you. Anyone else wishes to speak at this time? If not, I will close the public hearing. Bring it back for further discussion. Any other thoughts, comments, questions, discussion?
I'll just start off with
Mr. Grant.
a small item. There's other issues I'd like to discuss later, but it's the height of the shrubs. It says 30 inches for those yews along Frankton. That is too low for a lot of headlights on trucks, pickup trucks, SUVs, especially if they got their suspension raised. So I think if that's our standard, I think we're going to have to increase that height. But for headlights for the people on Frankton, I think that's too low of a visual barrier for headlights.
Mr. Tagle.
Do you know if there is parking on either, street parking on either one of these streets?
Parking on one side.
Ms. Fowler.
What kind of trucks, delivery trucks, are we talking about? Are we talking about semis? Are we talking about small delivery trucks?
Well, I can't speak to that with certainty, but...
Could you come to the microphone?
Yeah. Typically, today, the delivery trucks are kind of your van delivery trucks, not semi-delivery trucks. Cooper's Hawk is a scratch kitchen. So you're not going to see semis generally delivering, prepared Cisco-style food. Most of your delivery trucks today are when I say van, I don't mean passenger van, I mean the van box trucks, not, 18-wheel semis, which just would have too much material.
You would see some larger trucks, probably larger than a van. You'd probably see some larger trucks.
Yeah, I mean the box style, like moving van trucks, smaller trucks. That's typically what you see with delivery with restaurants today, and not the larger, 18-wheelers like you would see delivering to, a Target or something like that.
So where is the delivery site? Is that at the very, that little portion that goes north there? Is that where they would be delivering to?
Yes, so the delivery site would probably actually wind up being through the service door, which runs into the area there that stands out most to the north. And there's doors there that close it off. So it's also like the dumpster area in there, and it's this kitchen service door area. So it's all kind of hidden. So there's really no visual door there on the backside.
Thank you, Mr. Grant.
Another smaller item is garbage, the trash removal, the garbage removal hours. I know I see there's an enclosure right within the building, it looks like. Is that true? Is it within the building?
Yeah, we worked hard to, it's not exactly within the building, but it fits the architecture of the building, and it's kind of an enclosed courtyard area there that has a service door on the other side of it, so that way the doors to the garbage enclosure aren't open, and there's not people coming out and going around and opening the doors to put the garbage in. They come right out through the kitchen. There's no need to open those doors except for deliveries or for trash pickup of the actual dumpster. So it was designed that way. If the elevation here, the elevation here kind of shows what it looks like, so it kind of tries to blend in with the architecture of the building. We worked pretty hard on that to try and make that look nice. I know that's something that's important that we're trying to move towards. And so
and this one has kind of another drawing of what it looks like. So it is sort of enclosed. I guess you'd call it like a garage bay almost, like that. Okay, but my concern would be what the hours of trash pickup would be, because there are businesses that I can hear from my home that pick up trash it's exactly 4:15 every morning, and I hear bang, 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 and then the beep, 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 and there's 4:15.
I understand. I honestly can't tell you when trash pickup would be, because that's not something that's been arranged at this juncture. I know a lot of your trash pickups happen during the day. So I do have 3-4 other buildings that I manage in Troy, and they're all on regular morning hour pickups. You're at the mercy of the route, so I suspect we'd be on the same route as many other sites in the area, and the only way for me to find that out would probably be to ask the next door neighbor when their trash pickup occurs, and assuming that we would use the same service.
This is conditional rezoning.
Yeah, I understand.
So that would certainly be a condition of mine to have during daylight hours.
Yeah, and I would think it would be. I mean, I just honestly, I can't speak to it. I understand if it's a condition, and we'd work our way through that for sure.
One more question. What is the latest hour of operation for the facility?
So the kitchen closes at 9:30 Monday through Thursday, and at 10:30 on Friday and Saturday. So the bar essentially closes an hour after that, and the patrons who are there would finish their meals and leave. So, the restaurant will typically close about an hour after the last meal is served. So if the kitchen closes at 9:30, you're not going to get a lot of people coming in at the absolute last minute to eat at 9:30 at night, but it can happen. And you'll get people then coming in at 9:30, and it'll take them an hour about to eat. And so, generally speaking, everyone will be pretty much moved out of there by 10:30 during the week, 11:30 on the weekends when the kitchen closes at 10:30. But I think you'll find that there's not, there'll be people there, but it won't be a full seating for a 10:30 meal.
So would it be realistic to say that you would still have customers potentially even leaving around midnight, even on weeknights or weekends?
Potentially. I think that generally speaking, the bar will serve its last drink. The bar service will shut off an hour after, but it's not really like a bar type of restaurant. So I've been to three or four of them now, and I can't honestly say I've stuck around to the last service at each one of them, but I've been late to a few of them, and so it's kind of a restaurant where that tapers off because the food service isn't there, and it's just people who are there to drink till late are going somewhere else. It's a wine service kind of a restaurant. It's not a liquor bar. They're going to go. People who want to stay and drink are going to go across the street to Sedona or Kona or something else across the street that's a little bit more of a happy hour nightlife kind of place.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sanzica.
I'm really excited about the restaurant. To be very honest, it sounds like a great application, a great location. But what concerns me is the entrance off of Troy Road. And I guess I was going to ask the planners. We have several restaurants up and down Big Beaver, and are there any that actually have entrances off the side streets that you're aware of? I was thinking of Eddie V's.
Eddie V's does.
That's off of.
It's off of Alpine.
Of Alpine.
They also have an entrance off of Big Beaver in addition to Alpine.
I know, and I guess the question is, it's a big building, and the frontage obviously limits the driveway off of Big Beaver because of the configuration of the building. But are the lots for Big Eddie V's and much different than the lot proposed here as far as the width goes of the lot? And the question begs itself to ask: would the configuration of a building be a longer, deeper building, provide for an access off of Big Beaver? And I guess 2 drives off of Troy maybe unusual, but I have to ask the question, and I just wonder. And maybe if it comes to the microphone.
Yeah, the configuration here is kind of unusual compared to the other parcels along Big Beaver, and the fact that the two roads are very close to each other, Troy and Frankton. And so the road commission would probably never let us have an entrance off of Big Beaver because of the location of those two roads, and they won't let us have a drive. They'd want us to have a drive approach off Troy or Frankton. So.
Yeah, I'm not a road person, maybe.
Yeah.
So. Chairman may comment on that, but that would be a concern of mine, living on Troy, to have especially if the headlights are going to be addressing going into a residential property, how that could be mitigated. I guess that's. And I was curious how, if you've looked into.
So I made a big neighborhood outreach here. I knocked on the door of every home on the list within 300 feet. And actually gave them a $100 gift card to the Cooper's Hawk, the new Cooper's Hawk at Partridge Creek. So if you want to check it out, go check it out. Wanted them to go see it and say that maybe they would like to have a restaurant like this in their neighborhood that they could walk to. That's what really this Big Beaver district is about, and so that's why I did that, so that they could reach out and see the restaurant. I've talked to everyone in the neighborhood who would answer the door for me, and that was the vast majority of them. And the people most impacted by it are here tonight, and I think I have a good relationship with them. They're not opposed to the restaurant. We couldn't get an entryway off of Big Beaver Road. It just wouldn't work with the building, with the speeds that people would be coming in off of there, the way Big Beaver Road is, without a decel. It just doesn't work. It wouldn't work for my tenant. This space would need to have entryways off of the side streets. There is one. There's two on Troy Street, and the one to the north is really the one that's of concern to the neighbors here. This gentleman, I've forgotten your name, I'm sorry, I've been at your house 3 times, I think. Yeah. His house is the most impacted by it. He's directly across the street from the second entryway, and then the next most impacted by it is Michael, who I've talked to 30 times, because he's been our neighbor there for a long time. And I understand that it's the north entrance that is the most of their concern, because the southernmost entrance is directly across from the spa, and their entryway is also, on Troy Street. So the first entrance is almost directly across from them. It's the northernmost entrance that is the most impactful. And so I've indicated to the gentleman whose house is directly across from it that to the extent that if it winds up being there, to mitigate it, I was willing to landscape his front yard as much as I could to mitigate the headlights in his yard, and within reason, but his yard's not that big. So I was willing to accommodate him as much as I could. The alternative would be to have a second entrance directly across from the Troy Street entrance on Frankton, so that it would be like this on both sides. That entrance, the properties across from it, one is an abandoned home, and the other one is going to be bought as part of a future development that's going to happen there. There's just no question about that. Those parcels there are being acquired by development for development purposes. So I don't think there'd be a lot of impact for a second entryway there, and I think that works. My impression was, and I might be corrected if I'm wrong by planning, but that generally speaking from a traffic perspective, it is preferred on Troy Street because Troy Street has a traffic light. So cars that would come around and have the opportunity stopping at the traffic light or to pull out a traffic light from Troy Street. On Frankton Street, what will happen is you need to go to the next turnaround on Big Beaver Road. So cars there might be turning around, shooting across Big Beaver, hitting their brakes to turn onto Frankton Street. You're going to have probably a worse situation if it's right on Big Beaver, which we can't do. But so my kind of feeling was that that's why it's preferable, because there is a light there. But if
if the inclination or the movement was that they wanted, that the second entrance needed to be on Frankton Street, we could probably find a way to make the second entrance on Frankton Street. We've made some planning for that because I reached out to the neighbors, because I talked to them, because I understood what the opposition was to it. So that is really the mitigation for Troy Street. The northernmost entrance is the only one being complained about by the neighbors. And that could be moved, but I don't think it was preferable from a traffic perspective.
Well, thank you. It's a good explanation. I think it's appropriate. You know, I understand that we were proposing to postpone it tonight for further investigation, further research, and for the variances. And I think, obviously, I think it would help with the neighbors if we could consider taking it off of Frankton rather than Troy.
Mr. Savana.
So to answer Mr. Senzika's question, Mr. Carl looked online and saw the width of Eddie V's is approximately 300 feet, and it has access on Alpine and Big Beaver. This is only 245 feet in width, and it's got frontage on Big Beaver as well as Troy and Frankton. So Mr. Hunter indicated that the road commission would likely not support 2 streets and a curb cut within 245 feet, and I'm not an engineer, but that makes sense to me.
I'm an engineer, and I don't know that.
Based on what I know, I can also tell you that we did discuss this with the city engineer, and the thinking at the time was that it made sense to have the 2 entrances on Troy because of the fact that there's an existing light there, and so there's already the traffic and the convenience of the turning movement. That being said, I have a note to have another discussion with the engineer to talk about, to revisit this, and based on the input this evening, and
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other comments, Mr. Tagle?
A couple questions. Is there a loading zone requirement for this property?
Mr. Tagle, there is a loading zone requirement. However, the planning commission has the ability to waive that requirement as part of the site plan review.
Is there a loading zone shown on the documents anywhere?
There's no loading zone shown on the site plan.
I have a question for the petitioner, if you would. Is this going to be by valet parking only, or can a customer drive in, park his car or her car?
Customer can drive in and park his car. As far as when you mean loading, are you talking about deliveries? So generally speaking, your deliveries are not going to happen during business hours. Like they serve lunch and they serve dinner. So generally speaking, your deliveries are going to happen in the morning. They're not going to have deliveries there when they're conducting, everyone's there cooking and everything. That's sort of a prep situation. So it's a scratch kitchen again. So they kind of got to get everything in there in the earlier in the day to get everything ready for lunch and dinner. So yeah.
I can't quote scripture and verse, but typically ordinances do not allow a loading zone to impede traffic or parking. Okay. No matter what time of day it is. Usually it's a designated area for loading or unloading. But my point more so for the valet was that was the layout of this building designed for this site, or is this more of a stock plan?
No, they don't have a cookie cutter at all for Cooper's Hawk. So this is a challenging site because it's narrow, and we have looked at this thing 6 ways from Sunday. We have laid it out many, many ways, spent quite a bit of money designing it, trying to get the parking that we need for this establishment, because there's an
observation I have as a customer. Mm-hmm. If I park my car in the back north portion of your lot, mm-hmm. your entry point is not only at the very opposite end of the site, it's around the building. I mean, it's like to find it, it's like if you can find the entrance, great. And I'm just wondering, was that ever a consideration? Because what you're facing here is, if you look at the restaurants up and down Big Beaver, that's been an issue that we've talked about. Either you have a back door, mm-hmm. kind of like what you heard in the prior petitioner earlier this evening, or you at least make your trek or your path to the front door a little bit more visibly accessible. Yeah. And this one is screened very well.
It's a real challenge to have a transparent front where you are trying to have a front entryway on a restaurant where all your seating is, and you're looking to put your transparencies up front and all your seating up front, and can't have parking in front. Parking has to be in the rear. And get those people in and through a restaurant where, by requirement, you need to have a kitchen in the back and bathrooms in the back and storage areas in the back. And I've seen this, I've been to just about all of the restaurants up and down here, and I've seen the challenge in that regard, in that quite often you find this rear door regularly being used, walking past the bathrooms, walking past the kitchen area. And I know Keith Rogers is here tonight. Keith runs Restaurant Development Advisors, and he's helped us with this project. And Keith has been involved either up front or behind the scenes on nearly every restaurant that's gone in up and down Big Beaver Road. And he can tell you that it's a real challenge, and you see that at multiple places.
It's not dissimilar from Eddie V's. It's not dissimilar from Ocean Prime. It's not dissimilar from even Kona Grill across the street. Not dissimilar from, what's the name of the, Sedona Tap House. All of them have, because of the way the ordinance is written, have to have a front door. I just did the deal with the guys at Stony River. Same thing. It's, the door is kind of on the side, close to the front, because that's the way, and then they have a door that faces the front, coming out kind of out to their patio, to meet the ordinance requirements of, where the door has to go, where the, transparency of the building has to be, and to be pushed up that close to the road, you have to, what you're giving up is convenience. But that's not part of the ordinance. The ordinance wasn't designed to be convenient for retail or restaurants. It was designed to create a streetscape, which is, what you guys want to do, and so you're forcing everybody to design their no matter what they do, you're forcing everybody to design the building facing the road and the parking lot in the back. And there's no way around it with the way the ordinance is written. And everybody has kind of figured out how to make that happen. So, even when the Big Beaver ordinance didn't exist and Ocean Prime was done and Maggiano's was done, you look at what Maggiano's parking is, it's nowhere near the front door. So it's a very even playing field on Big Beaver Road when you start talking about these national restaurant companies coming into and redesigning their buildings so that they can fit within this ordinance. It gives them zero flexibility. There's less flexibility here, not mostly because of the width, it's because there's 3 street fronts, right? Even Eddie V's has and the reason they were able to get a curb cut is because there was a curb cut there for the power station. There's a Detroit Edison substation right next door to it on the other side. So that entrance existed. I brokered that deal to the developer for that. So, all that kind of went into when they were deciding whether they wanted to buy it or not, whether they could actually physically construct a building there. So, so that, every site's a little bit different along the Big Beaver corridor because they weren't designed to this ordinance. The site, the way everything was built, for a different time. And now we're trying to, on every site, try to figure out how to make it fit and allow for the best development possible. And I think, this is very similar to the Eddie V's design.
And to your point, Mr. Tagle, what we tried to do here, and kind of what Eddie V's has done, is in order to direct people to where the entrance is kind of on the side in the front where the portico and turnaround is. And so that kind of tells people pulling into the parking lots where to go in and where to walk to. And so there's a sidewalk. If you can get up to site plan.
Does that work?
Well, it doesn't, I guess it does, that there is a sidewalk running along the back of the property and the building past that green area, and then a sidewalk running up to the entryway right there. So you can either come in that way generally, and you kind of know where the entryway is because of where you come in. So I agree with you, it's not convenient, but it does kind of tell you where you need to go.
I appreciate your explanation and your explanation, but wouldn't it be great if you could come up with a better answer than what we've seen up and down Big Beaver?
It would.
I think you have a very easy opportunity to do that. You have a cutout in your building where the sprinkler room is and the wrap room is. Yeah. If you were to massage that corner a little bit, you could have another entry facing the north that would bring you into the restaurant from the north side. I mean, to me, that's pretty low-hanging fruit.
I understand. The only problem is that it's not an attractive entryway.
Well, make it attractive. That's easy. I mean, come on, really?
It's actually worse than that, because, having, a controlled entry point for a restaurant where they're coming into the front door and being seated by the hostess needs to be one place. You will not find a restaurant in the city that has two entrances where people are walking in and trying to figure out where they have to go within the building.
But
it's
they're
the same
coming to a
walk. It's the
single
same walk
point
within
in
the
the
building it is on the sidewalk.
Massage.
Yeah, I appreciate
really
your skill and your expertise and experience, but what you're pointing out is not a problem with what I'm saying. There is a single focal point once those two entry points get into the building, and that's where the receptionist goes, or the hostess goes.
But if there's an entranceway someplace else and people walk in it, they don't know where to go.
And there's a retail and wine tasting area that need to get everyone
United
into.
States, let alone Troy.
Yeah. It is a challenge, sir. And, yes, Mr. Campbell.
Just Maggiano's has two entrances, one that faces Big Beaver and one that faces their parking lot. And you walk down a hallway to get to the inside the restaurant to the greeter.
It's also attached to an office building, which is the common entrance for the office building. So
yes,
right. It's a different situation.
Well, but I'm saying, what John's saying is you can have two entrances and have one receptionist area, both leading either down a hallway or down, a pathway to get to that single entrance place to be seated.
You're adding building square footage to accommodate it. It's, that was there. So,
yeah,
it's a hard thing to solve, and I agree. It's not the best case. It really isn't. I wish it was different, but it's the way. It's not caused by the operator, it's not caused by the developer, it's caused by the ordinance. And the ordinance is what you're requiring us to adhere to, and the ordinance requires you to have a front door facing Big Beaver.
I think you're taking the ordinance and using that as a reason why you haven't looked at other creative solutions to solve the problem. And I don't agree with you that it's the ordinance's problem.
Okay.
Just to clarify one thing, while I would admit that we hear from developers that there are challenges in meeting the zoning ordinance, the zoning ordinance requires an entrance on Big Beaver. It does not require it to be only the primary entrance on Big Beaver. It does permit additional doors, entrances on the building. I just want to clarify that.
Mr. Krent. Another point. What is the actual width of the pavement on Troy? Slightly beyond, I realize it narrows right off of Big Beaver, but where the second driveway, the more northern driveway is, do you happen to give me an idea? Is that 20-foot wide, 24-foot wide? Is parking allowed on one side of that street right there?
It's plus or minus 22 feet in width, the actual pavement.
Okay, and then parking's allowed on one side of that street also, correct?
So, Mr. Tagle asked that question. I didn't have a chance to respond. So I don't know if the parking is permitted on either Troy or Frankton, but I heard Mr. Hunter indicate that there's parking on one side permitted on both streets, is what I heard Mr. Hunter say.
Right. So then would you end up with a vehicle that's takes up 10 feet or 12-foot width? You've got a 12-foot width of street to have a box truck maneuver around to get to that northernmost entrance. Seems a little bit tight. I'm just trying to figure out traffic. I realize our traffic specialists look at all this stuff, and you could put a no parking sign there, I guess. But still, that 20-foot wide width for a box truck, they take up at least on their turning. They're gonna take up that whole road just to turn in. It's really tight there. I'm just trying to find a better way to handle the mostly the residential traffic coming out. If they want to come out onto Big Beaver, what kind of obstructions are they going to encounter? And then, of course, during operations, if they want to exit from their street onto Big Beaver, what kind of traffic are they going to, I guess, engage with, especially people leaving the restaurant? Has there been any study as far as how many cars would back up on Troy from that restaurant, so preventing people from exiting their street, their residential street onto Big Beaver? I'm just trying to get a traffic idea, but it just seems like another congestion point.
Yep. So, Mr. Grant, just to confirm, I did look at aerials. There is no parking going on the northbound side of both Troy and Frankton. On the southbound side, there is allowed parking.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions for the applicant at this time? Or I think for tonight we're good.
One last comment.
Yes, Mr.
I love the restaurant. It looks great. I just wish the traffic, we can somehow massage the traffic so that people, the residents that have been there for umpteen years, don't get encumbered with a traffic jam just to get out of their house.
Yeah, there is a traffic light there, so
that helps.
Hopefully would help to alleviate it so people don't get backed up waiting to get on Big Beaver Road.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the reasons why the 2 entryways on Troy Street as opposed to Frankton.
Yep.
So,
yeah, that's what I'm trying to weigh.
The neighbors want to hear.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. I see it's difficult. I'd like to see a Frankton eggs, but I could see what you've described as a traffic situation. It doesn't make sense before the light to stop because traffic will back up, and then how are you going to get out of Frankton? It's just I could see all those things happening in my head.
So, Mr. Salvador, did you have a thought?
No.
Okay. Just one quick thought on the traffic situation on Troy and Frankton there. I realize that Troy is a location where the signal is, but for just an initial thought here for better traffic distribution through the parking lot, exiting, if you have 2 locations for traffic to exit, the way it's designed now, if you have vehicles wanting to go eastbound on Big Beaver, they actually have to go westbound before they go eastbound. But if you have vehicles exiting on Frankton, they can make a right and take that first turnaround right there before even heading more westbound. So it would create a better distribution of vehicles and a smaller chance that you have backing up on Troy only, and that it would distribute on Frankton equally, or offer that opportunity to customers to go either way.
I can see that. That's a good point. Yeah. It's just that it'll take a little bit of a learning curve for patrons to realize that after a while.
Yeah. So there's just looking at that. But I think customers who realize that if they go out on Troy and they realize they could have gone on Frankton and taken that turnaround, it's probably a quick learning curve there, but it's just for the distribution that makes more sense.
I agree. I like that point.
So if we don't have any more thoughts, then I think no more comments on this item. I think we'll leave it at that for this evening, so thank you.
We actually do not take any action on this.
No action tonight, correct. So, okay. Other business, we'll move on to item number 8 on the agenda, approval of the 2019 meeting schedule. We don't have to take any action on this, Mr. Savant. It's just on the agenda. I mean,
I didn't propose a resolution, but we actually are looking for a resolution to approve the schedule. It could be a very simple resolution.
I'll make a motion to approve the schedule.
Moved by Mr. Krent to approve the schedule, and a second by Mr. Faison.
And it's to approve the 2019 Planning Commission regular meeting date schedule, just to clarify.
So moved by Mr. Krent, seconded by Mr. Faison to approve the schedule for 2019. Roll call, Ms. Sarnicki, please.
Mr. Stanzica?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Abahidian?
Yes.
Ms. Cruz?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Ms. Fowler?
Yes.
Mr. Krent?
Yes.
Motion passes. Schedule is approved for 2019. Moving on to item number 9, public comment for items on the current agenda. Anyone in the audience that wishes to speak to an item on the current agenda this evening? Seeing none, we will move to Planning Commission comments. Item number 10. Start with Ms. Sarnicki.
Done, thank you.
Ms. Fowler.
No, I just thought that Mr. Snyder did a nice job. He really did his homework on the restaurant. So he did a nice job with the residents.
Mr. Grant.
Since Padma Kupa is not here, she is having a swearing-in ceremony at the Michigan State University Management Building from 2 to 4 on Saturday, January 5th, for anybody's knowledge on that.
Okay. Mr. Tagle?
Nothing, thank you.
Ms. Cruz?
Nothing for me, thank you.
My comment is Mr. Sanzica. Today's your last meeting, is that right, for the year?
That's right.
How many years on the Planning Commission?
I think it's been 10 years.
10 years, wow. So I just wanted to thank you for your service and amazing input on stormwater management. We need somebody that can replace you, that can have at least the same amount of input and insight on these projects. So until that happens, I might have to really pick up where you're leaving off and do some homework before the meetings to make sure we have the input.
I want a do-over. I didn't realize it was Mr. Sanzica's last meeting.
Do-over? Okay, we'll back up.
No, I want to thank Mr. Sanzica for his years of service. I'm sorry, I did not realize that we were done. You were gone. I'm a little speechless, but yes, thank you. And if Ollie forgets to ask about stormwater management, I will.
Good.
I promise.
And trash enclosures.
Oh, well, you know I'm all about the nice-looking trash enclosures. But yeah, we can carry that stormwater baton until someone else comes along and does that.
You know, if I could just add too, Phil, when you're at home now watching these, if you want to text into one of us, what questions to ask, feel free to do that.
Unpaid consultant, right.
But thank you. And I'm sorry to see you go. I hope that you know what to do with yourself every other Tuesday night with all that free time.
Watching the meetings.
Mr. Faison.
I'll echo the comments. I've enjoyed working with you, Phil. I'll miss you. But I can realize the attraction of going to South Carolina?
South Carolina.
Yeah. So good luck to you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Mr. Zanzica.
Well, I can't tell you how much of an honor it's been to be on the Planning Commission, to work with all of you and to work with the consultants and the attorney and the planning director. It's totally professional. I've always been impressed by the professionalism and by the impact that you've done with all the developers and how great a job you've done. And quite honestly, it's been an honor to work with each of you on the Planning Commission. Each of you have your own insight, your own concerns, and that's what it's all about on the Planning Commission. How you can impact and how you can contribute to the developments, and everyone has your unique experiences, life experiences, and it's truly it's a great commitment and a great honor to serve the community. And I'm sure all of you have done a great job, and it's Ms. Fowler, I really haven't had a chance to talk to you much, but I'm sure you'll enjoy being on the Planning Commission and working. And one other thing I want to mention too is I did spend some time on the ZBA, and it was a great experience. I think it's a different perspective on it's more of an individual dealing with people's issues, and I would encourage anyone, if they haven't had the opportunity to sit on the Zoning Board of Appeals, I believe it meets once a month, but it's very worthwhile, and you do learn a lot, and it's a great learning experience. But it's truly been a pleasure. The 10 years have gone by really fast, and in fact, like I said, I respect all of your opinions, and all of you have done a great job, and especially the staff and the consultants and the attorney. It's been my pleasure to serve on this board. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'll just reiterate, thank you, Mr. Sinzika, for your service. I first met you when I was the cut my teeth on the ZBA, so I always appreciated your insight and your comments. I always thought they were thoughtful and very useful. For those of you following along, the Tollbrook McClure litigation matter has been scheduled for oral argument in Cincinnati on January 30th.
Mr. Savina.
Phil, thanks for the kind words. It's been a pleasure working with you. You brought a lot over the last decade, and you will be missed. You did mention Zoning Board of Appeals. I sent an email to all the members. Just a reminder, our bylaws and state law actually require that we have a Zoning Board of Appeals representative from the Planning Commission who serves on the Zoning Board of Appeals. So with Mr. Sanzica's stepping away from the Planning Commission, there's going to be a vacancy on the Zoning Board of Appeals. So we don't have to decide this evening, but first meeting in January, we'll be looking for someone who's interested to serve as the member for the Zoning Board of Appeals. So we'd rather not. We're going to have 3 brand new members on the Planning Commission. If we have to, one of those 3 members could serve as a ZBA rep. It's not ideal because they're going to be cutting their teeth as new Planning Commission members, and I'd hate to burden them with another board meeting. So the veterans who are on the Planning Commission, just think about whether you'd be willing to serve on the ZBA. Thanks.
Excuse me. Is the schedule published for 2019 for the ZBA meetings?
They probably haven't approved their schedule.
I think they'll approve it in a week.
And is it once a month?
It's a third Tuesday. Yeah, thanks for that. So it's the third Tuesday at 7:30 p.m.
It's right in Ollie's schedule.
Mr. Carlisle.
Mr. Sanzica, it's been a pleasure serving with you. I've learned a lot, and so it really has been a pleasure serving with you. Unfortunately, I've only served with you about a third of the time you've actually been on the Planning Commission, but it's been a pleasure. I've learned a lot, and you will be greatly missed. So, thank you.
Thank you. If there are no other comments, then we are adjourned for tonight. Thank you.